The Drayton house had smelled like wood polish and ambition for as long as I had been allowed to scrub its floors. I knew the smell because I had made it, kneeling every morning while Cyrus walked past me as if I were a fixture he had bought from a catalog. I had been with them since I was 15, a conduit contract, the lawyers called it. One mage acquired to fill the gap in a noble family's elemental lineup. The Draytons had fire, earth, and wind. They lacked water. I was purchased to be their water, not a son, not even a servant, a component, the kind of thing you replace when it stops working. For a year, the conditioning ran on a schedule tighter than anything Cyrus expected of his own children. Mana-binding rituals at dawn, runs that stripped the feeling from my legs by noon, potions that tasted like iron and left me shaking on the stone floor for hours afterward. Every few months, the researchers would aim the measuring device at my chest, and the screen would say water, and Cyrus would nod, and the schedule would continue. The morning it ended started like every other, 46 kilometers before the sun cleared the tree line. That was the daily run. Not a suggestion, not a test, just the way it was. I finished it the way I always finished it, legs shaking, lungs raw, swallowing the urge to fold in half on the flagstones. I had learned to collapse only after I was out of sight. Anything less was a conversation with Cyrus I could not afford. Marcus was already waiting at the training yard when I stumbled in. He leaned against the archway with his arms folded, watching me the way you watch a horse you suspect is lame. Mira stood behind him, nose pinched like the air near me had gone sour. I heard Marcus tell his father he doubted I would ever amount to anything. Mira added, without looking at me, that she could not stand the sight of my face. Neither of them spoke to me directly. They never did. I was discussed, not addressed. Then came the test. 6 years of conditioning, and every result before this one had said water. That morning, Cyrus brought in 3 researchers to administer the final measurement. They performed the ritual. They aimed the device at me, and the screen blinked a single word: error. Not water, not fire, not wind or earth, or anything the Draytons had paid for. Just error, glowing on the display like a door that refused to open. Cyrus's face went the color of bad weather. The researchers stammered explanations. He shoved one of them aside and read the result himself. Then he turned to me, and in a voice I had heard 6 years of, he told me to get out. He said if he ever saw my face near the estate again, there would be consequences I would not walk away from. I did not flinch. I had learned by then that flinching only gave them another excuse. The back gate was closer than the front. I walked out through it, barefoot, into the rain. I did not take anything because I did not own anything. Not a coat, not a coin, not even a name, really. Cyrus had never given me the Drayton surname. A tool needs no lineage, he had said once, and I had not argued because arguing required believing you deserved better. The gate closed behind me and no one called my name. I walked until the rain stopped and the road ran out. There was no plan. Plans require a destination, and I did not have one. I just kept moving because standing still felt like dying slower, and at least walking gave my legs something to do besides remember the 46 kilometers behind them. I thought about the word error. The 6th time, it said something no one in that room could explain, and instead of asking what had changed, Cyrus had thrown out the tool. That told me more about the Draytons than 6 years of living under their roof ever had. They did not want answers. They wanted confirmation. And when the device stopped confirming, I stopped being useful. The forest thickened around dusk. The canopy closed overhead, and the light went from gray to near black. I could hear water dripping off branches somewhere above me, and something else, deeper in the trees. Breathing that was not mine. The Fenrir came out of the dark like a wall of fur and teeth, larger than any wolf I had ever seen in the Drayton bestiary illustrations, large enough that its shoulder was level with my chest. It looked at me, not past me, at me, as though it had been waiting. I threw a stone. It was the only thing I had. The stone hit the creature's right eye, and for a single breath, the beast flinched. Then it lunged, and I went down, and the world turned into mud and cold and weight. How long I lay there after it pulled back, I do not know. Minutes, maybe longer. The cold had soaked through everything. My body felt like a sack of wet sand someone had dropped at the edge of the path. That was where she found me. I did not see her face at first, just a hand, pale and warm, pressing against my forehead, and something else, something I could not name at the time, a faint cold light near my left side. Later, I would learn it came from the sword at her hip. an heirloom that had not glowed for anyone in 200 years. She told her guards to lift me. Her voice was steady and low, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed without raising itself. Then the rain stopped, and then I was somewhere warm. I woke up in a bed that smelled like clean linen. That was the detail that almost broke me before anything else did. Not the bandages wrapped around my ribs, not the ache in my legs, not the unfamiliar ceiling. The linen. It smelled like someone had washed it because they wanted a guest to sleep well, not because a servant had been ordered to. I lay there for a long time, staring at the grain of the wooden beam above me, trying to decide whether the warmth in the blanket was a trap. Through the window, I could see a courtyard lit by lanterns, strung between stone columns, and beyond it, the dark outline of a garden. This was not the Drayton estate. There were no training schedules nailed to the door, no residue of potions on the nightstand, no lock on the outside of the handle. Everything here was built without the heaviness of a house that treated people as inventory. I flexed my fingers under the blanket. They worked. My legs ached, but they bent. Whoever had bandaged me had done it carefully, with the kind of attention that suggested concern rather than maintenance. I had been maintained for a year. I had never been cared for. The difference sat in my chest like a question I did not have the vocabulary to ask. The roar shattered the quiet before I could decide whether to trust it. It came from the courtyard, a sound so deep it vibrated in the floor beneath me. I pushed myself upright and looked through the window. A second Fenrir, larger than the one in the forest, stood in the center of the yard. Its fur was matted and dark, its eyes locked on the upper floor of the mansion, on me. Below it, the silver-haired girl had already drawn a bow. She fired. The arrow cut a clean line toward the beast's throat, but the Fenrir read the trajectory and twisted aside. It charged. Her guards shouted at her to fall back. She planted her feet and knocked another arrow. I would learn later that this was who she was, the kind of person who heard retreat and heard it as a suggestion meant for someone else. I was out the window before I had finished deciding to move. The drop was 2 stories. My legs took it badly, but they held. The Fenrir's attention swung to me the moment I hit the ground. "You want me?" I said. My voice came out flatter than I meant it to. "Then come." I threw another stone. Same arm, same aim. It hit the beast's right eye, and the Fenrir screamed and reared. The silver-haired girl did not hesitate. She unsheathed the sword from her hip and threw it across the courtyard in a clean arc. I caught it by the handle without thinking. The blade was ice, not a metaphor, not cold steel. The metal was gone. In its place, a blade of solid frost extended from the hilt, pale blue and luminous, crackling faintly in the warm night air. The cold ran up my arm and into my chest, and for the first time in my life, something inside me answered. I swung once. A column of ice erupted from the ground beneath the Fenrir and drove upward through its body like a frozen spear. The beast hung there for a moment, suspended, legs twitching. Then it went still. Frost melted off my knuckles. My wounds had reopened. Heat ran down my side beneath the bandages. But I stayed standing. For the first time in 6 years, I stayed standing after the thing that should have put me down. Then the pain caught up, and my knees buckled, and someone caught me before I hit the stone. I woke again. The candle had burned low. The sword, sheathed and silent, rested on the table beside the bed. Vivian was asleep in a chair next to me, her chin propped on one hand, silver hair falling loose across her shoulder. She stirred when I shifted and opened her eyes, as if she had been waiting for exactly that sound. "You saved me twice." Her voice was quieter now than it had been in the courtyard. "Once on the road, when you distracted the first one long enough for me to reach you, and tonight." I told her I had only thrown a rock. She almost smiled. Then she looked at the sword on the table, and her expression shifted to something older, something that carried the weight of a family history I did not yet understand. Frost Flower. She picked up the sheathed blade and turned it in her hands. That is its name. It absorbs the wielder's attribute and manifests as a blade of that element. She set it back down, gently. No one in my family has ever made it respond. Not my father, not my grandfather, not the 12 heads before him. You picked it up and it became ice. I did not know what to say to that. The device at the Drayton estate had read me as error. This sword had read me as something else entirely. None of it made sense, but for the first time, the word error did not feel like an ending. She asked for my story, so I gave it to her, in the shortest sentences I could manage. One fact after another, in order, without decoration. When I finished, Vivian did not speak for a long time. The candle guttered. Shadows moved on the wall behind her. Then she reached across the space between the chair and the bed and took both of my hands in hers. "Thank you." Her grip tightened, just enough for me to feel it, for saving me, and for staying alive long enough to be saved. I had not cried in 6 years, but something in the way she held my hands, firm and unafraid, and not asking for anything in return, broke the seal I had built over all of it. The tears came, not loudly, not dramatically, just water running down a face that had forgotten how to make it, in a room that smelled like clean linen, held by someone who did not let go. When it passed, she offered me a place in her home. She said it simply, the way she seemed to say everything, as if the magnitude of the thing did not change the size of the words needed to say it. A place, a home. The words did not fit easily inside my head, so I asked whether a commoner like me was even allowed to stay in a noble house. She answered with 2 rules. First, no honorifics when speaking to her. Second, I was to call her Vel. "We are the same age," she added, and the corner of her mouth turned up. 16. I checked your intake papers while you were asleep, so no more bowing. I agreed. I did not know what else to do with a kindness that had no invoice stapled to it. The moon was in the window behind her. It caught the silver in her hair and turned it white. She sat back in the chair and closed her eyes, and I understood that she had no intention of leaving a wounded guest alone in an unfamiliar room. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling and let myself feel, for the first time since I could remember, the warmth of a hand that had held mine because it wanted to and not because it was measuring what I was worth. The Celsius dining table had 11 forks. I counted them while Vivian poured tea as though this were an ordinary morning and not the strangest meal of my life. There were forks for meat, forks for fish, forks for pastry, forks for fruit, and 2 whose purpose I could not guess. At the Drayton estate, I had eaten on the floor, not at a table, not with utensils, not seated. On the floor, with whatever the kitchen had set aside for the help, which was sometimes bread and sometimes nothing. Now there was jam in a crystal bowl and a cloth napkin folded into the shape of a bird beside my plate. I picked up the napkin and unfolded it slowly because I did not want to ruin it. Vivian watched me without commenting. She buttered a roll and set it on the edge of my plate without asking whether I wanted it. I ate it. It was warm. That kept being the detail that undid me, the warmth of things. Warm bread, warm linen, warm hands the night before. "The Royal Magic Knight Academy holds entrance exams next week," she said, the way a person mentions the weather. "Written and practical. You are taking it." I set down the fork I had been holding incorrectly. "Is a commoner permitted?" She did not answer the question. Instead, she stood, crossed the room, and returned with a textbook thicker than my forearm. She opened it to the first chapter and set it in front of me. I read the first page, then the second. By the third, I was answering her questions before she finished asking them. The door opened behind us, and a girl walked in, carrying a second stack of books. Black braids, glasses, a posture that said she had spent more time in libraries than sunlight. Vivienne introduced her as Laurel Aarons, her oldest friend, from a family of magical scholars who had served the Celsius house for generations. Laurel looked at me the way a librarian looks at an unfamiliar volume. She sat down, opened a practice exam, and began quizzing me. I answered every question correctly. Her eyebrow rose. "Where did you study?" she asked. "I read everything the Draytons left on the shelves." The truth was simpler than she expected. The conditioning had included theory. Cyrus had made sure his investment could recite elemental law from memory, even if the investment was never allowed to sit at the table while doing it. Laurel closed the practice book. She looked at Vivian, then back at me, and for the first time since walking in, her expression softened from assessment to something closer to interest. For the first time, someone was looking at what I could do rather than what I had failed to be. The sentence was longer than the ones I usually allowed myself. I let it stand. The academy looked like a castle pretending to be a school. Stone pillars taller than any I had seen in the Drayton Library illustrations. Iron gates that required 4 men to push open. Students in pressed uniforms moving through hallways wide enough for carriages. Every surface whispered money and lineage, and I walked through it in borrowed clothes, carrying a sword that technically belonged to someone else's family. The written exam lasted 2 hours. I finished in 40 minutes and spent the rest staring at the ceiling, trying not to draw attention. Vivian caught my eye from across the hall when I set down my pen. She gave me a single nod, the kind that said she had expected nothing less. The practical exam was held in the arena. Vivian went first. She drew her bow and dismantled her golem in 3 shots, water magic threading through each arrow to split the stone along its joints. The crowd murmured. Laurel followed, and her dark magic technique dropped the construct before it finished standing. They made it look routine. My name was called last, examinee number 300. The stands had thinned, but the ones who remained were the noble families and their staff, the people who stayed because they had heard about the commoner in the roster. Examiner Osvaldo stood at the center of the arena floor. He was broad, gold-haired, bearded, wearing a military dress coat that looked more like a costume than a uniform. He looked at me the way Cyrus used to look at underperforming equipment. He told the crowd I was the only commoner candidate this year. His voice carried the words like they were something he had found stuck to his shoe. Then he raised his hand and summoned my opponent. It was not a golem. The thing that rose from the arena floor was twice the height of any construct the other examinees had faced. Steel plating over a mechanical frame, a fist on one arm, a claw on the other, and a single red eye that tracked my movement before the dust had settled. A mechanical giant. The kind of thing the Academy reserved for punishment demonstrations, not entrance exams. The crowd went quiet. Someone in the upper tier whispered the word rigged. I recognized the smell first. Stored mana, heated metal, the faint ozone of forced animation. The Drayton conditioning rooms had smelled like this. The giant swung. I moved. The fist cratered the arena floor where I had been standing. My standard sword bounced off the plating twice. The steel was too thick. The claw swept low, and I cleared it by inches, rolling across the stone, feeling the stitches in my side strain from the Fenrir wounds that had not fully healed. There was one option. I had known it from the moment the giant rose. I drew Frostflower. The blade became ice the same way it had in the courtyard 3 nights earlier. I channeled everything I had into one strike and drove it into the construct's chest plate. Ice exploded outward, not from the blade, from inside the giant, spreading through its joints, cracking the plating from within, encasing the entire frame in a glacier that climbed from the arena floor to the height of the stands. The mechanical eye flickered once and went dark. The arena was silent. Frost drifted down from the frozen column like snow. Osvaldo had fallen backward. His mouth was open. He did not get up. In the upper stands, I saw Marcus Drayton. His face had gone the color of paper. He stared at me for 3 full seconds, then turned and ran out of the arena without looking back. I stood in the center of the ice and the silence and the staring faces, and I did not smile. The wound was too old for that, but I stayed on my feet. In front of every noble who had ever looked past a commoner like me, I stayed on my feet. Then the pain caught up, and I walked to the waiting room and sat down on a bench, and Vivian caught my arm before I fell off it. I could not sleep. The night after the exam, I lay in the guest bed and stared at the ceiling and waited for the thing I had been waiting for since the first morning in this house. The moment the door opened and someone told me to leave, Vivian came instead. She sat in the chair by the window and told me her parents were arriving the next day. She would explain everything to them. I should not worry. I did not know how to tell her that worrying was the only skill the Draytons had not trained out of me. The following morning, a carriage pulled through the estate gate. Vivian's father was a tall man with a pipe and the posture of someone who had fought wars and come home polite. Her mother was composed and soft-spoken, and she looked at me the way mothers look at stray animals their children have brought indoors. I was summoned to the drawing room. Vivian stood beside me. The fire crackled. Her father asked her to explain. She told them about finding me on the road, about the Fenrir, about Frostflower glowing for the first time in over 200 years, about the exam that morning and the glacier in the arena. Then her father turned to me and asked for my side. I gave it to him the way I had given it to Vivian. Short sentences, no decoration. The Draytons went unnamed. He did not ask. Her mother's hand went to her mouth. Her father's expression did not change, but the pipe went still between his fingers, and that told me everything. After a long silence, he offered me a formal position as Vivian's bodyguard, a stipend, legal standing. He also offered me the Celsius surname of employment, the way noble houses extend their name to contracted retainers. I declined the surname. "I have not earned one yet," I said. It was the only thing that came out. Her father looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and for the first time since walking into the room, I felt like I had been spoken to rather than evaluated. Vivian did not gloat. She did not say, "I told you so." She walked me back to the guest room and told me the academy term started in 2 weeks and that she expected me ready. 2 weeks later, I stood inside the Royal Magic Knight Academy wearing a uniform that fit. That detail should not have mattered as much as it did. The entrance ceremony was all light and noise. The headmaster, an elderly white-haired man named Joseph Sepphoris, who had reportedly mastered every branch of magic in the kingdom, gave a speech about potential and promise. The vice principal assigned students to 5 houses based on their exam data. Vivian, Laurel, and I were placed in the Sky Griffin class. The 3 of us in the same house felt too convenient to be coincidence, and I filed that thought away without voicing it. Our homeroom instructor was a woman named Alessa Reed, an elf with a smile that made you feel like she already knew what you were about to say. She explained the star medal system: bronze, silver, gold. The student with the most medals at the end of the semester earned the title of class supervisor. Then her smile sharpened. She announced a survival race. All freshmen, a run through the demon forest to a tower and back. The top 5 finishers would receive a silver star medal. The bottom 10 would be expelled. The classroom went very quiet. I looked at Vivian. She looked back. We did not need to speak. The demon forest smelled like wet bark and adrenaline. 200 students scattered from the starting line into a canopy so thick the sun came through in coins. The rules were simple. Reach the tower, report your name, do not finish in the bottom 10. Vivian, Laurel, and I moved together. Conserve mana, deny terrain, finish in the top 5. That was the plan. Vivian took point and used a water pillar to blast a path through a cluster of students blocking the main trail. Laurel followed with a dark magic flash that blinded the ones who tried to chase us. I held the rear and kept count. We were moving fast. The tower was visible through a gap in the canopy when the air changed. A wall of golden light dropped around me like a cage. One moment, I was running beside Vivian. The next, silence. Complete and sudden, as if someone had pressed a hand over the forest's mouth. Through the barrier, I could see Vivian pounding against the golden surface, shouting words I could not hear. Laurel was examining the structure with her hands, trying to find a seam. Inside the barrier, a young man stood with his sword already drawn. Blonde hair, green eyes, a face that belonged on the cover of a noble portrait, cold and composed, and not remotely interested in explaining itself. "I will be direct," he said. His voice carried no heat. "I cannot let you advance." He came at me with precision that would have killed a lesser swordsman. Fast, tight, efficient. Light magic laced his blade. I parried with Frostflower and the ice crackled against his edge. We exchanged 4 strikes. On the 3rd, I noticed something. His aim was wrong. Not wrong clumsy, wrong deliberate. He was targeting my arms and legs, not my center. He was fighting like someone following a contract, not someone who wanted to win. On the 4th exchange, I sheathed Frostflower and stepped back. "You are pulling your strikes," I said. He stopped. His sword stayed up, but his eyes changed. Something behind the composure shifted, just for a second, like a lock turning in a room no one was supposed to enter. "You do not actually want to stop me." I let the silence carry the rest. "You want to have tried." He looked at me for a long moment. The barrier held. The forest was silent. Then he lowered his blade, and the golden wall dissolved, and the sound of the race rushed back in like a wave. He walked away without a word. I watched him go. His shoulders carried something I recognized, the particular weight of a person doing a thing they did not believe in because someone they could not refuse had asked them to. I did not know his name yet. I would learn it soon enough. Aiden Highland. Vivian was at my side before I could take a step. She asked if I was hurt. I shook my head. Laurel looked at the space where the barrier had been and said nothing, but her eyes were calculating. We ran. The tower examiner wrote our names as the 3rd group to arrive, 2 ahead of us. A red-haired girl I did not recognize had finished first. Second was a muscular young man with a shaved head and a jacket thrown over a bare chest who looked like he had jogged the whole course for fun. He walked up to me before the ink on the ledger was dry. "You are Adrian, right?" His voice was the loudest thing in the clearing. "You were incredible at the entrance exam. That ice column. I have been wanting to meet you." He stuck out his hand. "Hudson Leo." I shook it. His grip could have cracked stone. "I wanted to get along with a strong person like you," he said, grinning wide enough to see every tooth. Behind me, Vivian and Laurel exchanged a look that I chose not to interpret. The examiner told us the top 5 was complete. He activated a spatial transfer array at the base of the tower and sent us back to the main building. The race was over. Somewhere in the forest, Marcus Drayton was still running. He did not know it yet, but a red-haired girl whose name I would learn later had trapped him behind a wall of fire he could not outrun. His secondary Earth attribute was no match for her flames. He was not injured. He simply did not finish in time. The results were read at the post-race assembly. The top 5 names came first. Mine was among them. A silver star medal was placed in my hand by an examiner who avoided my eyes. Then the bottom 10. Marcus Drayton. His name echoed off the assembly hall walls like something dropped from a height. Expelled. The murmur that followed was not sympathetic. It was the sound a crowd makes when a name it associated with power becomes a name it associates with failure. I did not look for Marcus in the hall. He was not there. I learned later he had already left the grounds. I did not see what happened at the Drayton estate that night, but I could imagine it because I had lived in that house long enough to know how Cyrus processed failure. He had been in a good mood all day. He had planned this, the survival race, the expulsion rule, the hired student sent to target me. Osvaldo had been his instrument. Marcus was supposed to finish strong while I disappeared from the roster. Then the communication device rang, and instead of hearing my name on the expulsion list, he heard his son's. Marcus came home and knelt on the study floor. Cyrus told him he had stained the family name with something that could never be cleaned. His voice carried through the walls. The servants could hear it. Mira could hear it. She did not come downstairs. Then Osvaldo told Cyrus the rest, that the boy he had thrown out was the talk of every noble family with a seat at the academy. Cyrus did not break anything. He was too furious for that. Fury that large goes quiet. It folds inward and starts planning. Somewhere in the capital, his name was being spoken the way he had never planned for it to be spoken. As the head of a house that discarded the most interesting thing that had happened to the academy in a generation, pleasure was not what I felt when I imagined it. The wound was too old for that. But that night, alone in the Celsius guest room with the silver medal on the desk and the uniform on the chair, I allowed myself one small breath, the kind you take when you realize, for the first time, that the people who threw you away might have to live with the cost of it. Nothing needed to be said. The breath was enough. The academy settled into a rhythm the way water settles after a stone drops through it, slowly, and not all at once. Mornings started with Alessa Reed at the front of the classroom, chalk in hand, her voice carrying the way a good teacher's does. She taught us the 3 magic systems: attribute, life, and spirit, and the 6 elements underneath: fire, water, wind, earth, light, dark. Most mages had one affinity. Headmaster Sepphoris, she mentioned casually, could use all 6. The room went quiet. She let the silence hold, then demonstrated. A small flame on her fingertip without a word of incantation. Silent casting. Then a circle on the blackboard, a flash of light, and a student named Asserd was standing at the back wall instead of the front row. He stumbled. The class laughed. I sat between Vivian and Laurel in every class. Most of what Alessa said, I already knew. The Drayton conditioning rooms had included theory alongside the drills. Cyrus had wanted his investment literate. The irony was that the education he gave me to serve his family was now the reason I could sit in a classroom he would never be welcome in again. The first time I saw Finn Wendell, he was pressed against a hallway wall with his shoulders drawn up around his ears. 3 students blocked his path. The one in front, dark-haired, smiling the kind of smile that has nothing to do with being happy. Caleb Archer, son of a council member. Beside him, 2 thugs I never bothered to learn the names of. Caleb was talking. Something about low-born blood and permission to breathe in his hallway. Finn, a small orange-haired boy with a wind attribute pin on his collar, was doing the thing I recognized from years of practice, making himself smaller so the fist would miss. I had been that boy. Different hallway, same geometry, someone with power standing over someone without it, and the corridor empty because everyone had already decided it was not their problem. My feet moved before the rest of me decided. Caleb told me to keep walking. I stopped 3 paces from Finn and did not. After lunch, he found me in the schoolyard. The 2 thugs flanked him. He listed 3 traits of people he hated: those who disrupted his entertainment, those who interrupted him, those with low-born blood. The crew-cut thug drew his blade. I drew Frostflower. The cold came before the swing. His sword froze edge to hilt, his hands locked around the grip. The other thug launched a fireball. I raised an ice wall. The flame hit it and died. He ran. Caleb stood alone. Frost crept up his sleeves. I told him the next time he touched a student who could not fight back, I would freeze more than his clothes. He nodded. He left. Finn found me afterward. He bowed so low his orange hair brushed his knees. I told him to stop. He stopped, looked up, and said something I was not ready for. "You are the first person who came back down the hallway." Alessa called me to her office the next day. She closed the door, leaned against her desk, and told me she had heard about the incident. "Your ice is unusual," she said. "4th rank, possibly 5th. I have not seen a classification for it. The manifestation speed, the mana density, the way it responds to intent rather than incantation. You are not casting spells, Adrian. You are thinking, and the ice answers." She set a copper medal on the desk between us. For the hallway, Headmaster Sepharis reviewed the incident and approved it. The medal was lighter than the silver one. It meant more. Alessa mentioned it later, the way a teacher mentions something she wants a student to file away. Sepharis sat behind his desk. Harlan stood at the window. The topic was Cyrus, who had been writing letters about the survival race every day since his son's expulsion. Sepharis read the latest one and set it down as if it smelled. Harlan offered a measured assessment. The council might apply pressure, but the rules had been clear and the results documented. He suggested they monitor the situation but take no action. His tone was supportive and careful. Sepharis agreed. Using political connections to eliminate a student was exactly the kind of behavior the academy existed to overrule. They moved on. Harlan stood at the window a moment longer, watching the courtyard below. If his eyes lingered on anything specific, there was no one paying close enough attention to notice. The joint training exercise with Yellow Class was held on a marble arena that looked designed to intimidate you before your opponent did. Hudson Leo found me before pairings were announced. He grinned. "Today," he said, "the fight was honest. Hudson used earth magic to harden his fists and came at me like a landslide. His first punch cratered the marble where I had been standing. He was strong the way a river is strong, without needing to explain itself. I drew Frostflower. The arena floor froze. Hudson's feet locked. His momentum died mid-charge. The ice climbed his gauntlets and sealed his hands. He looked down at the ice, then up at me, and laughed. The sound filled the arena. Complete loss. He shook his head, still smiling. But next time, I will win. He meant it. I believed him. The visit came without warning. Vivian and I returned from the academy to find Cyrus Drayton seated in the Celsius entrance hall. Vivian's father stood near the staircase with the look of a man who had run out of patience 3 sentences ago. Cyrus stood when he saw me. He offered what the narration in my head could only call a generous correction of past misunderstandings. Talent recognized too late. Opportunities still available. A room with my name on it if I would simply come home. He produced a sum of money large enough to make the butler glance sideways. I looked at the man who had bought me, trained me on the floor of a conditioning room, refused me a surname, and thrown me into the rain when the device said error. No. One word. No explanation. No insult. No negotiation. The refusal was unweaponizable, and that was the point. Vivian's father gestured toward the door. Cyrus gathered his money, his coat, and whatever remained of the plan that had brought him here, and left. Vivian could tell something had settled in me after the visit. She said it like this: "Tomorrow, come with me." She took me to a village where farmers had been losing livestock to kobolds. She had been clearing them for free for months because the guild charged fees the village could not afford. The fight was short. Her arrows pinned 2. I froze the rest. Afterward, she led me down a side path. It opened into a flower field that ran to the edge of a cliff, and beyond the cliff was the sea. The flowers were white and blue and gold, and the wind moved through them in waves that looked like breathing. Vi unpacked a lunch she had made herself. She warned me it might be terrible, It was not terrible. I never liked the noble world, she said, watching the sea. The salons, the lineage talk, the idea that who your parents were matters more than what you do. She pulled a blade of grass and wound it around her finger. This field is more me than any ballroom. I did not tell her my own version. The silence between us was not the empty kind. It was the kind where two people are sitting inside the same feeling, and neither of them needs to name it. Her glove brushed mine when she passed me the bread. The dragon came on the walk back. A shadow blotted the canopy. The air pressure dropped. Vivian raised her bow. I reached for Frostflower. A voice cut through the trees. A single incantation, and a column of lightning split the sky and drove through the dragon's chest. The creature folded in midair and crashed into the forest. Aiden Highland stepped out of the tree line. Dusty uniform, sheathed sword. "Just hunting dragons," he said. His tone did not invite follow-up questions. Vivian did not let it pass. She produced a locket from her coat. Gold, oval, hinge bent from a fall. She had found it in the demon forest after the survival race, in the spot where Aiden's barrier had been. Inside was a portrait of a young girl with blonde hair and green eyes. The smile had the particular thinness of someone who has been ill for a long time and has learned to perform wellness for the people who visit. Aiden's mask cracked, not slowly, all at once, the way ice cracks when you step on it wrong. Her name was Amelia, his sister. She had lost her magic to an illness the Highland family could not afford to treat. A noble girl without magic in a world that priced nobility by output. Examiner Osvaldo had come to Aiden with an offer. 1-star medal, delivered in secret, if Aiden could get me expelled. Osvaldo had found the one lever that could move a boy whose conscience was otherwise immovable. Aiden told us all of it. His voice went thin in the places where her name appeared, as if the word itself cost him something. He had failed the contract because he could not finish the job. He had looked at me inside the barrier and seen someone doing a desperate thing to survive, and it had reminded him of his sister, and he had walked away. He apologized. The word sat between us like a stone someone had set down carefully. I did not leverage the confession. I had spent 6 years as someone else's contract. I had done wrong things to survive. I did not get to sit across from a boy who had done the same and pretend the math was different. I understand, I said. He stared at me. He waited for the condition, the price. There was none. He picked up the locket, thumb running across the portrait, and walked into the trees. The friendship would form on its own schedule. Some things need gravity, not a handshake. Vivian watched him go. Then she looked at me. "Do you want it?" She was not asking about the locket. "Yes." She handed it to me. I put it in my pocket. Vivian began private training with a teacher named Carla Atlee. She told me not to follow, and meant it. Finn pointed me toward the back mountain instead, a training area behind the main campus, technically open, practically abandoned. The path was overgrown. The clearing at the end was not. Someone had been using it. The training dummies were scarred black. The stone targets were cracked. The air smelled like ash. A girl stood in the center, driving fire spells into a stone wall with the kind of intensity that suggested the wall had personally offended her. Red hair in a ponytail, crimson eyes. Sienna Elmore, red class. The girl who had trapped Marcus behind a wall of flame during the survival race. She told me to leave. I was about to when the ground split behind me and a vine as thick as my arm shot out of the earth. Man-eating plant. Experimental specimen escaped from the magical biology department. Sienna pivoted and launched a fireball into the first one. It collapsed in flame and sap. A second erupted from the tree line behind her. I pulled her sideways by the shoulder. The plant's jaws closed on the air where her head had been. 3 ice spears through its stem. It went still. The clearing was on fire in 2 places and frozen in 1. Sienna looked at the dead plant, then at me. Her expression settled on something that was not hostility, but was not gratitude either. "Thank you," she said. The words came out like they had been pulled from her against her will. She asked my name. I told her. She said she might remember it. We sat on a fallen log while the fires burned out. She did not explain why she trained alone. The worn dummies and cracked targets told the story for her. Someone who had been told their worth depended on their output, and who had decided the answer was to produce more until the measurement broke. Alessa Reed appeared on the path above us. She looked at the scorched clearing and smiled. "You are among the strongest first years the Academy has enrolled in a decade." She leaned against a tree. "I would like to train you both, starting with environmental techniques." She glanced at me. "Rain freeze applications, for one." Sienna nodded once and left without saying goodbye. That evening, I told Vivian about it. The plants, the fire, the girl training alone in a clearing nobody used, the way Alessa had offered to teach us. I told it with more energy than I usually carried into a room. Vivian sat across from me and listened. When I finished, her face did not move. She said the dinner was ready. She stood and walked toward the kitchen, posture the same as always, but the air in the room had shifted. I had spent 6 years reading rooms. I could read fear, contempt, calculation, and boredom with the precision of someone whose survival depended on it. But the thing on Vivian's face was none of those. Something quieter and harder to name. Something I had no file for. She did not bring up Sienna again. I did not bring up the flowers. We ate in a silence that was different from the comfortable ones we had built over the past weeks. Somewhere in the day, I had walked into a feeling Vivian had not given me a key for, and I did not yet have the vocabulary to ask for one. The Drayton estate was quiet the way a house is quiet after a funeral that has not happened yet. Cyrus sat behind his desk with both hands flat on the surface, staring at the door Adrian had walked through the last time they shared a room. That visit to the Celsius mansion had ended in a single word, one syllable from a boy he had raised on his floor. The memory of it had not left. It sat in the chair across from him like a guest that refused to go home. He swept a stack of letters off the desk. They scattered across the floorboards. Complaint drafts to the academy, appeals to the Commerce Council, a half-finished petition to the Knight Directorate demanding Adrian's reassignment. None of them had been sent. None of them would have worked. He had exhausted every legitimate channel, and the channels had responded with the same word Adrian had given him at the Celsius dining table. No. His fist came down on the wood hard enough to rattle the inkwell. The candle flame flinched. The room settled back into the same bruised quiet it had been holding all evening. Marcus came home an hour before dawn. I did not see this part. What I know came later from the night report Sepphoris read to me in his office, and from what Mira told the investigators after her arrest. But the pieces fit together the way broken pottery fits together when you already know the shape of the cup. Marcus had gone to the Eclair district, the capital's underbelly, the place where the lamplighters did not bother relighting the posts because the people who walked those streets preferred the dark. He found a black market alchemist working below a sign painted with a serpent swallowing its own tail. He paid in gold. The alchemist handed him a small dark pill, faceted like a frozen tear, and told him the cost would come later. Marcus swallowed it on the walk home. By the time he reached the Drayton estate, his pupils had spread wide enough to swallow the brown of his irises. His hands shook. His magic, which had never ranked above second tier, now pulsed through his veins in waves he could feel but could not aim. The forbidden demonic pill did what the alchemist promised. It spiked his capacity. It also ate whatever restraint he had been using to keep himself upright. Mira opened her door and saw him passing her room. She said his name once. He turned. Whatever she saw in his face made her step back and lock the door without finishing the sentence. She did not come out again until the Knights arrived. The next morning, I was sitting in Vice Principal Harlan's herbology lecture, third row from the back, trying to remember how many grams of mugwort went into a standard restorative tincture. Vivian was on my left. Laurel had her notebook open on my right, writing faster than Harlan was talking. Hudson was behind me with his feet on the desk, and Finn was beside him, looking like the potion ingredients might bite. Harlan was mid-sentence about unicorn blood ratios when the wall exploded. Not the door, the wall. A fireball the size of a carriage punched through the stone 2 meters from the window and sent a wave of heat across the room that knocked 3 students off their chairs. Harlan threw up a barrier before the second one hit. The barrier held. His sleeve caught fire from the blowback, and he smothered it with his other hand without changing his expression. Through the hole in the wall, standing in the courtyard with smoke curling off both palms and a grin that did not belong on a human face, was Marcus Drayton. He was still in his school uniform, the one the academy had not taken back after his expulsion. His eyes were wrong, not angry, not focused. They were wide and wet and aimed at one person. Me, he laughed. The sound came in hiccuping fragments, broken by a wheeze that told me his lungs were working harder than they should. He said something I will not repeat word for word, because the words themselves were not the point. The point was what they meant. He had come to kill me. He said so. He said it while laughing. The demonic pill had narrowed his entire world to the boy his father had thrown out, and now that boy was the only shape left in his field of vision. I did not think about it. I moved. The shattered windowsill caught my sleeve as I vaulted it and hit the courtyard running. Behind me, I heard Harlan shout for the students to stay and treat the wounded. Vivian's voice started to follow, and then stopped. She had made the same calculation I had. The wounded needed her water magic more than the rain needed a second body. The forest hollow at the back of the academy grounds was 200 paces away, and Marcus followed me every step of it like a fire follows a draft. The rain was falling in sheets by the time I reached the hollow. I turned. Marcus came through the trees 10 paces behind me, both hands burning. His fireballs should have evaporated the rain around him. They did not. The corruption had made his output enormous, but unfocused. The fire spread in wide, sloppy arcs that hit the canopy and hissed into steam rather than striking. He threw one directly at me. I raised a wall of ice with my right hand, and the fireball shattered against it, spraying orange sparks across the mud. He threw another. I blocked it. He threw a third and a fourth, laughing between each one, and the laughter was worse than the fire because it meant he did not know he was losing. I took a breath. Somewhere behind me, a branch cracked under the weight of wet leaves, and I heard Alessa Reed's voice. Not in the hollow, in my memory. Weeks ago, in the aftermath of the plant attack, she had watched me sheathe Frostflower and said something I carried with me the way other people carry good luck coins. She said that the sword was a fine amplifier. She said it was also a crutch. She said that when the sword was taken away, the world was still there, and the world had more water in it than any blade could hold. I reached down and unfastened Frostflower's sheath from my belt. The sword hit the ground. Marcus stopped laughing. For one heartbeat, his ruined eyes focused, and he saw what I had done, and something in the back of whatever was left of his mind recognized that a boy who puts down his weapon in a fight is either surrendering or about to do something the weapon could not. I opened my palm. The rain fell into it, and I exhaled. Every drop of water in a 30-meter radius stopped falling. They hung in the air like 1,000 frozen needles, suspended in the space between the canopy and the mud, catching the gray light in a way that turned the hollow into something that looked like the inside of a glass cathedral. The rain on Marcus's coat, the water running down his sleeves, the moisture in the fabric of his uniform, all of it solidified at once. His legs locked, his arms froze at his sides. The fire on his palms guttered and died because the air around his hands had become a shell of ice too dense for heat to escape. He stood there, encased from the knees, up in his own soaked clothing, now rigid. The corruption still raged behind his eyes. His body did not respond. My boots sank into the mud as I walked up to him. The silence in the hollow was absolute. No rain fell. No wind moved. The only sound was the faint creak of ice settling on the branches. There was nothing to say to Marcus Drayton that the rain had not already said for me. So I waited. Harlan arrived 2 minutes later, breathing hard. He stopped at the edge of the hollow and looked at the frozen rain hanging in the air around Marcus. He looked at Frostflower lying on the ground. He looked at me. His expression did not change. It rarely did, but his breathing paused for a beat longer than exertion would explain. He said something about recklessness. I told him the culprit was secured. He walked to Marcus, pressed 2 fingers to the frozen boy's forehead, and murmured a knockout incantation. Marcus's eyes rolled back. The corruption in them dimmed. His body slumped inside the ice casing, unconscious but alive. Harlan picked up Frostflower and handed it back to me without comment. We walked back to the academy in the rain that had started falling again the moment I released the freeze. Neither of us spoke. I did not know then what he was thinking. I did not know that the man walking beside me in the rain was filing a mental report on the technique he had just watched, and that the report would be read by people whose names I would not learn until the worst night of my life. He walked me to the main building. He filed the incident report that put Marcus in the infirmary under guard, and he wrote the recommendation that gave Headmaster Sepphoris the legal authority to do what came next. Sepphoris's office smelled like old paper and black tea. I sat across from him in a chair that was too comfortable for a room where I expected to be punished. My uniform was still damp. My hair was dripping onto the collar. He had offered me a towel when I walked in, and I had taken it, which felt stranger than anything that had happened in the forest. He asked me what I had done. I told him. He listened with his hands folded on the desk and his reading spectacles slightly crooked, and when I finished, he did not say anything for a long moment. Then he told me the academy considered my action protective. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, as if the words themselves were enough, and decoration would insult us both. Marcus Drayton had attacked a classroom of students. I had drawn him away from the wounded and neutralized him without lethal force. The academy had no grounds to punish me and no desire to try. I sat with that for a moment. The towel was warm in my hands. He poured himself a second cup of tea, took a sip, and mentioned, between the sip and the setting down of the cup, that the Knights would be visiting the Drayton estate this evening. The sentence landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. He explained, in the same unhurried tone, that the spell residue from Marcus's corrupted magic had been traced. The alchemist who sold the forbidden demonic pill had been identified and questioned. The alchemist, faced with the alternative, had named his supplier network. Among the names on that network was a procurement account registered to the Drayton household. The forbidden magical compounds that Marcus had consumed were not a one-time purchase. The family had been involved in that market for longer than Marcus had been alive. Cyrus Drayton was, as Sepphoris phrased it, about to discover his name was on the wrong inventory. I did not say anything. Sepphoris reached into his desk drawer and placed a coin on the surface between us. It was gold-trimmed, smaller than a star medal, with the Academy crest pressed into one side. He said it was not technically a medal. He said it functioned as one in the Academy's records. He said I had earned it. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He told me the rain had made for a clean ending. He told me to go change. I stood, tucked the coin into my pocket, and walked to the door. I turned back once. He was already reading something else, his spectacles straight now, his tea half finished. The arrest warrant he had signed that morning sitting in a folder I had not noticed on the corner of his desk. The Drayton estate had a gravel drive that ran 200 paces from the iron gate to the front steps. I had walked that drive 1,000 times as a boy, carrying firewood, hauling water, scrubbing the stones on my knees when the gardener said they were not white enough. I knew every stone. I knew the sound the gravel made under a cartwheel and the different sound it made under a boot heel and the different sound it made under bare feet in winter. That evening, it made a sound I had never heard. The sound of 12 horses and 3 carriages arriving in formation. I was not there. I did not see it with my own eyes. But the night report that Sepphoris shared with me the following week was detailed enough to build the scene in my mind, as clearly as if I had stood at the gate and watched. The Capital Knights rode up the drive in a single column, torches lit despite the early hour, because the protocol required witnesses to see the crest on the lead horse's blanket. The Drayton household staff, the cooks, the gardeners, the stable hand, the 3 maids who had served the family since before I arrived, stopped what they were doing and came to the windows. The same staff Cyrus walked past every morning as if they were fixtures he had bought from a catalog. The captain of the unit dismounted at the front step. He was a man named Ortex, short blue hair, formal armor, a voice that carried without effort. He did not knock. He announced himself at the door, and the maid who opened it was already shaking. Cyrus came to the entrance hall in his burgundy coat, the one with the gold-trimmed buckle that bore the Drayton family crest. He had been sitting in his office waiting for Marcus to come home. Marcus was not coming home. Marcus was in the Academy infirmary, unconscious, under guard, with the residue of a forbidden demonic pill still burning through his veins. Ortex read the warrant aloud. The words carried through the open door and across the gravel to where the gardener stood, pretending not to listen. Trafficking in forbidden magical compounds. Willful endangerment of students at the Royal Magic Knight Academy. Contribution to a corrupted magic incident, resulting in structural damage and bodily harm. The charges were not questions. They were facts that had already been verified, and the reading of them was a courtesy the law extended to the accused before the law stopped being courteous. Cyrus tried to argue. He told Ortex the charges were baseless. He demanded a private hearing. He invoked the Commerce Council. He invoked names, families with seats on the Capitol's advisory board, people who owed him favors, people who had dined at this table and drunk his wine. Ortex listened to all of it with the patience of a man who had heard better arguments from better liars and found none of them persuasive. Then he told Cyrus to step forward. Cyrus did not move. For a moment, the entrance hall was perfectly still. The maid was pressed against the wall with one hand over her mouth. The candles on the hall table cast long shadows across the marble floor. Cyrus had made me polish every morning for 6 years. Ortex said it again. Cyrus stepped forward. 2 knights flanked him. He walked through his own front door, past the gardener who had turned his back, past the stable hand who was staring at the ground, past the iron gate he had locked behind me the day he threw me out. He walked to the carriage. He climbed in. The door closed behind him. He had worn that coat to every banquet, every council dinner, every morning walk through the halls where I knelt with a rag and a tin of polish. Now he wore it into a carriage that would take him somewhere. The crest on the buckle meant nothing at all. Mira was in the upstairs corridor. She had not come down. 2 knights went up to escort her. She stood in the doorframe of her bedroom with her arms folded across her chest and her chin lifted in the expression I remembered from every meal I had eaten at the edge of that family's table. The expression that said she was better than whatever was in front of her. The knight told her she was required to come with them. She did not answer. She did not look at him. She looked past him, at the hallway, at the portraits on the wall, at the house she had lived in since birth. Then she walked. She did not look back. Marcus was already in custody. A separate carriage had collected him from the academy infirmary earlier that afternoon. He had woken once, mumbled something about me, and gone back under. The household staff were detained for questioning. One by one, the cooks, the gardener, the maids, walked out of the estate and into the custody carriages. The older steward, the one who had served the Drayton house for 30 years, was the last to leave. He paused at the gate. He looked back at the dark windows. He exhaled, long and slow, as if he had been holding the breath for every one of those 30 years. The carriages left. The gate closed. The torches along the drive burned down to their brackets, and no one came to replace them. The Drayton estate went dark. Vivian brought me tea. She set the cup on the edge of my desk without saying anything and sat on the chair by the window. The moonlight caught the silver in her hair and turned it white. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had cleared the way skies clear after storms. Completely, as if the clouds had never been there. I held the cup in both hands. It was warm. The gold-trimmed coin from Sepharis sat on the desk beside a stack of notes I would not read tonight. She did not ask what had happened. She already knew. The academy had been talking about it since the classroom wall came down, and by the time I walked back from Sepharis's office, the version of the story that was spreading through the dormitories had already grown a version where I had drawn Frostflower and cut Marcus in half, which was wrong in every detail, but accurate in the part that mattered, which was that Marcus Drayton was gone and was not coming back. We sat in the quiet. It was not the same quiet as the one from a few weeks ago, the one where she had not brought up Sienna and I had not brought up the flowers. That quiet had been full of something neither of us could name. This one was empty, not sad empty, clean empty. The kind of silence that happens after you put down something you have been carrying for so long, you forgot it was heavy. I thought about the maid pressing her hand over her mouth because she had been afraid of that man for the same number of years I had, and now neither of us had to be. The Drayton house had smelled like wood polish and ambition for as long as I had been alive. I knew the smell because I had made it every morning kneeling, while Cyrus walked past me like furniture. The smell had followed me to the Celsius mansion, to the academy, to the forest hollow in the rain. It had sat in the back of my throat like a word I could not spit out. It was gone now, not because I had done something to end it, because the family that made the smell had been walked out of their own house and into carriages that would take them to cells where no one would polish the floors for them. The wood would dry, the ambition would rot, and the name Drayton, which had owned the air I breathed for 6 years, would stop being said in any room that mattered. The tea cooled in my hands. Vivian was still there. The moonlight had moved from the window to the floor. I did not smile. The wound was too old to close in one evening, but for the first time since the device had blinked error and Cyrus had told me to leave, the wound was being treated rather than fed. I drank the tea. It tasted like chamomile and something I did not have a name for yet, something that sat in the chest where the weight used to be. Vi caught my eye from the chair by the window and held it for a moment longer than she needed to. And in that moment, the absence of the Drayton name was louder than anything that family had ever said to me while they still had the authority to say it. The academy's punishment for what happened with Marcus was cleaning the owl hut. Sepharis had signed the order himself, which meant the punishment was exactly as serious as it looked and not 1 ounce more. I understood the logic. The academy needed a visible consequence. The headmaster needed me invisible for a week. Both things could be true at once. The hut was small, dim, and smelled like every bird that had ever lived in it at the same time. I had the broom. Finn had the bucket. Neither of us had been given instructions more detailed than make it less terrible, which left a generous amount of room for interpretation. I have always liked owls, Finn said, scrubbing a perch with the kind of focus he usually reserved for wind theory equations. They do not judge you, I did not argue. Owls had never once looked at me with disappointment, which put them ahead of most humans I had known. The door opened. Aiden walked in, looked at the filth, and said nothing. He picked up a rag and started on the far wall. No greeting, no explanation. He had not been assigned to the hut. He was here because he wanted to be, and he would rather scrub bird droppings in silence than say so. Hudson arrived 20 minutes later, filling the doorframe like a man trying to enter a birdhouse. He did not care about the owls. He cared about the midterms. I am going to fail. He said it without shame, as if announcing the weather. Magic mathematics, herbalism, kingdom geography. I cannot do any of them. Aiden looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he pointed at the door. Library, after class, all of you. Aiden was a brutal teacher. He was also, quietly, an effective one. He ran through formulas with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times. And when Finn asked him why his explanations were so polished, he said it was because he had practiced them for Amelia. Over 1,000 imaginary tutoring sessions. Nobody laughed. Hudson wrote down every formula Aiden dictated. Finn took notes in the margins. I watched Aiden teach and thought, he is kinder than he wants anyone to know. Across the library, the air had changed. Vivian and Sienna had been circling each other for 2 weeks. The tension had started the afternoon Sienna and I had spent time together, and Vivian had not said a word about it since. She did not need to. The silence was louder than anything she could have said. Laurel saw it before anyone else. She always did. She sat between them in the reading section one afternoon and proposed a settlement in a voice so calm it could have been reading a weather report. The midterm scores would decide it. No shouting, no corridor confrontations. A clean, numerical answer. Vivian accepted. Sienna accepted. Both of them used the word fine in a tone that meant the opposite. 2 weeks passed. Hudson survived Aiden's tutoring. Finn excelled in every subject he sat for. Aiden's teaching veered into stories about Amelia every 3rd sentence, which meant Hudson's magical biology preparation consisted almost entirely of facts about unicorns that Amelia apparently loved. He would later answer a question about bicorn anatomy using unicorn trivia and somehow scrape a passing grade. The practical midterm was held in the same coliseum as the entrance exam. My opponent was a tall student named Max Ravens who carried a long spear and introduced himself at volume. He charged. I raised my left arm and let the ice form around it like a second skin. His spear struck the ice, skidded, and before he could pull it back, I stepped inside his reach and disarmed him. 3 minutes. The crowd was polite. I walked off the arena floor and found my friends in the stands. Vivienne was not watching me. She was watching the arena entrance, because the next match was the one that mattered. Vivienne and Sienna walked to opposite ends of the arena and did not look at each other until the signal dropped. The first exchange was ranged. Sienna's fire magic met Vivienne's water in the center of the arena, and the collision turned the air into steam. The crowd went silent. Students who had been chatting stopped mid-sentence. This was not a midterm exercise. This was 2 girls who had spent 2 weeks converting fury into practice hours, and every spell carried the receipts. Sienna pushed forward with a flame wall. Vivienne answered with a water spiral that punched through the center and forced Sienna to roll sideways. They exchanged at close range. Sienna's sword against Vivienne's bow, and neither gave ground. 10 minutes passed. The examiner looked uncertain. Aiden, from the stands, analyzed the match in a tone flat enough to be narrating a chess game. Then, both of them decided to end it. Sienna cast her strongest spell, a dragon-shaped flame that tracked its target and filled half the arena with heat. Vivienne answered with a water strike she had trained in secret for 2 weeks. The spells collided. The shockwave blew both fighters off their feet. Neither stood up. The referee counted. Neither moved. The match was declared a draw. I was in the arena before the dust settled. Vivienne was lying on her back, breathing in short bursts, staring at the sky. "You are reckless," I said. She turned her head. "You are one to talk." Across the arena, Sienna was being helped to her feet by the medical staff. She looked at Vivian and said something I could not hear. Vivian, still on the ground, almost smiled. It was the first honest look two rivals had given each other since the semester started. In the observation room, Headmaster Sepphoris pulled a piece of parchment from his coat and added a name beneath a short list. The audience could not see which name. He folded the parchment and returned it to his pocket. Vivian came home quieter than usual that evening. I brought her water without being asked. She drank it. Neither of us mentioned Sienna. The day after the duel, Vivian invited me to a cake shop on Garnet Street. She said she was curious about the pastries. She was not curious about the pastries. Two men tried to bother her at the entrance. One put his hand on her shoulder. She broke his grip with a twist and knocked his friend sideways before I could step in. The shop owner emerged, took one look at the scene, scolded both of us for the disturbance, and proposed that we work the afternoon shift as payment. Vivienne put on an apron. I put on an apron. We served cakes. Vivienne was surprisingly good at carrying trays. I was surprisingly bad at small talk with strangers, which did not stop the shop owner from putting me at the front counter. Sienna walked in 20 minutes later, dressed in plain clothes instead of her academy uniform. She saw us behind the counter and went completely still. "Order something or leave," I said. She sat down, ordered a pancake and coffee, and ate the pancake with an expression I had never seen on her face. She looked happy, genuinely, unguardedly happy. When she caught me looking, the expression vanished. "Mind your own plates," she said. Sepphoris arrived in a long coat, ordered a hot cake and tea, then asked for hot sauce and chili flakes. I brought them without comment. He poured the hot sauce over the pancake in a slow spiral, sprinkled the chili flakes, and ate the result with an expression of profound contentment. The table beside him fell silent. He did not notice. Then Aiden walked in, and behind him, holding his hand, was a girl. She was small, blonde hair, green eyes that looked too large for her face. She moved slowly, the way people move when their body has not been reliable for a long time, and Aiden adjusted his pace to match hers without thinking about it. He pulled out her chair. He read the menu to her. He ordered apple tart and a brownie, and when the tart arrived, he watched her eat it with the kind of attention he usually reserved for combat analysis. Her name was Amelia, Aiden's sister, the one he collected star medals for. She ate her tart, smiled, and told Aiden he was the best brother in the world. He looked away. His jaw was tight. I had never seen him fight this hard to keep his face still. Before they left, Amelia came to the counter. She looked up at me with those two large eyes and spoke plainly. "You are my brother's friend, right?" I looked at Aiden. He was pretending to study the menu board. "My brother is very kind," she said, "but he is clumsy with people, so please remain his friend. He needs that." She held out her smallest finger. I looked at it. I had not made a promise to anyone in years. The last promise I remembered making was to Vivian, and that one had cost me a Fenrir and a week in bandages. I hooked my finger around hers. "I will," she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made me understand, in one clean second, why Aiden Highland would burn the entire academy down for her without blinking. As the shop closed, the owner handed us a box of leftover pastries and told us to share them with our partner. Vivian turned the color of the sunset. We walked home in the autumn air. Halfway across the bridge, she said it. "I am sorry." Quiet. No preamble. For the silence. After the afternoon with Sienna, I did not know how to say what I was feeling, so I said nothing, and that was worse. I watched the water beneath the bridge. I did not understand what the silence meant. And now I do. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. Somewhere between the bridge and the Celsius gate, her hand found mine, and I let it stay. The midterm rankings went up on a Tuesday. Vivian was first, I was second, Laurel was third, Finn was fourth. Hudson survived somewhere in the middle, which was a miracle given that half his magical biology answers referenced unicorn trivia from Aiden's tangents. Vivian received a gold star medal from Alessa Reed. She held it the way she held everything, like she had earned it and knew it. I caught Laurel watching with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with her own third-place finish. At lunch, Alessa called me to the corridor. She leaned against the wall, arms folded, and looked at me with the expression teachers use when they have caught something and want you to know they have caught it. "You scored exactly 80 in every written subject." She let it sit. "Everyone, herbalism, geography, mathematics, combat theory, 80. Not 79, Not 81, 80. I said nothing. That kind of precision is harder than getting a perfect score, she said. You knew every answer. You chose which ones to get wrong. I still said nothing. She straightened. The headmaster said, after the Marcus incident, that you have the qualities of a great knight. A pause. I think he was right, but a great knight does not hide behind 80 points because he is afraid of being seen. She walked away. I stood in the corridor and thought about what it meant to stop hiding. I did not have an answer, but the question stayed. The bread. 3 days later, a third year named Dean Gadget found us in the practice hall. He was the captain of the white class Grajakudo team, which had finished last for 2 consecutive years. He had watched us practice the combined throw drill and decided, apparently, that 2 first years were worth the gamble. Vivian accepted before I finished processing the invitation. I was a breaker. She was a breaker. The match was against yellow class, and the field transformed into a mountain stream terrain the moment the whistle blew. Vivian secured the blade first. She ran wide. I cut inside, took the handoff, and threw. The yellow class blocker, a third year who had been ranked top defense the previous season, caught it clean. The blade stopped dead. The crowd held still. Dean called the signal. Vivian and I both knew what it meant. We ran side by side. She fed water magic into the blade's surface. I layered ice over the water and shaped it into a rotating edge. We threw together, and the timing was not close. It was identical. The blade left our hands at the same instant, spinning with a combined force that blew past the blocker and buried itself in the yellow class target. The stands erupted. Hudson's voice carried over the entire stadium. Finn was on his feet. Laurel was clapping with both hands, her satchel forgotten on the bench. White class won. The Academy newspaper ran the story the following morning. My name was in it. Vivian's name was in it. The students who had refused to say either name a month ago were suddenly saying both. The day after the Grajakudo victory, the Academy sent us underground. The practical exercise was simple to explain and nearly impossible to execute. Form a team. Enter the underground labyrinth beneath the Academy. Descend as deep as possible. 10 floors. Most first-year teams reached the 3rd or 4th. The record for our year had not been set yet. My team was already decided. Vivian on attack, me on defense and ice support, Laurel on dark magic disruption and analysis, Finn on perception. His wind magic let him read air currents through the corridors, which meant he could tell us which passage led deeper and which was a dead end before we committed to either. We held a strategy meeting in the 30 minutes before departure. Finn was nervous. Laurel was methodical. Vivian was already running tactical scenarios in her head. I laid out the rule. If anyone's reserves hit critical, we surface, no arguments. Then we descended. The labyrinth was ancient, older than the Academy itself. Stone corridors wide enough for 4 abreast, lit by crystal lamps that hummed with a frequency I could feel behind my teeth. At the first fork, the left passage glowed blue and the right glowed red. Most teams, Finn said, chose blue. Something about the color felt safer. Right, Finn said. He had his eyes closed, palms turned outward, reading the current. The air moves on the right. The left is a dead end. We went right. On the 2nd floor, an assassination doll dropped from the ceiling, armored, blade arms, magic-resistant plating that shrugged off Vivian's water strike without flinching. I blocked its first swing with an ice wall, and Laurel stepped forward. Her dark magic wrapped around the doll like smoke. It did not attack the armor. It pulled the magic from inside the construct, the way a drain pulls water. The doll's red eyes flickered. Its arms dropped. It fell. Somewhere behind us, another team was teleported out. We heard the screams. We kept moving. Floors 3 through 6 blurred together. 2 hours in, only 3 teams remained. We were the deepest. Finn was lying on the stone floor of the 6th floor rest area, arms spread, breathing like he had just finished a race. Laurel sat with her back to the wall, conserving. Vivian cleaned her bowstring and said nothing about being tired, which was how I knew she was. We pushed to the 7th floor. Giant spiders with poisoned fangs and webs that stuck to everything. I froze the ground beneath them. 2 dodged and dropped on silk lines. Vivian's arrows caught them mid-air. When the smaller ones burst from the fallen bodies, Laurel's dark magic drained them before they scattered. A bronze golem waited at the intersection, bigger than the one from the entrance exam. Vivian's water softened its joints. I froze the water solid, and the golem's legs locked. Vivian's arrow struck the core. While we caught our breath, a second golem came from behind. Finn had dropped his guard for 3 seconds. I shoved him sideways, threw an ice shield over Laurel, and Vivian put an arrow through the thing's eye before it reached us. Finn apologized 4 times. I told him it was over. We reached the 8th floor running on stubbornness and whatever reserves Finn's wind magic could feed into our legs. I sat the team down. The 10th floor is the goal, I said. Not another fight. The 9th floor is the last real obstacle. We use everything we have left on the 9th. Nothing held back. They looked at me. 3 faces, all of them exhausted. None of them argued. Floor 9 was a single room, vast, circular, stone pillars holding up a ceiling I could not see. At the far end, a staircase led down to the 10th floor. Between us and the staircase, the floor began to glow. The construct rose from the center of the chamber, 4 arms. 2 held curved blades, 2 held maces. A single red eye sat in the center of a featureless head. It was kin to the mechanical giant from the entrance exam, the one I had destroyed on my first day. This one was bigger, this one was faster, and when I gathered ice for a strike, it fired a beam from that red eye before I could release. Laurel's dark magic caught the beam, canceled it, but the message was clear. The construct reacted to large-scale magic. Anything I threw at full power, it would counter before the spell could land. Vivian looked at me. I will draw it. That is my job. Your job, she said, is to end it. Mine is to give you the opening. She was already moving. Trust me. Finn fed wind into all of us. Vivian ran wide arcs around the construct, forcing its eye to track her, taxing its reaction systems. Laurel sent low-power dark spikes that nicked at the construct's mana without triggering the beam response. The construct jerked between targets. Its eye flickered. I knelt at the center of the chamber, drew Frostflower, closed my eyes. Every drop of moisture in the room answered. The construct's coolant lines, the condensation on the pillars, the sweat on my own skin. I pulled it all, shaped it, held it. Vivian, move. She threw herself sideways. The construct's eye swung to me. The beam fired. My ice met it head on, swallowed it, and kept going. A converging blade of frost that punched through the construct's chest and out the other side. The red eye went dark. The arms dropped. The construct fell. The staircase to the 10th floor was open. We walked through together. The exam ended. The teleportation circle activated, and we were standing on the surface in sunlight, blinking, bandaged, holding gold star medals that Sephiroth had signed himself. Finn was crying. Laurel was leaning against a wall, eyes closed, smiling. Vivian caught my eye across the medical tent and did not say anything. She did not need to. I fell asleep in the medical wing before dinner. The next morning, Vivian walked into the breakfast room holding the kingdom's main newspaper. She put it on the table beside my plate. She did not say anything. She sat down. She watched me look at it. The front page was a photograph. 4 students on the academy steps, holding gold star medals. I recognized every face. The one on the left was Finn, grinning so wide his eyes had nearly disappeared. Laurel was beside him, glasses slightly crooked, looking at the camera as if it had asked a question she was still deciding how to answer. Vivian stood straight, her silver hair catching the light, one hand resting on the medal at her collar, and beside her, the boy with black hair and dark eyes, who looked like he had not slept in a week. That was me. Above the photograph, in the kingdom's largest typeface, a headline I read 3 times before the words settled. Sky Griffin class conquers the Academy Labyrinth. First time in 60 years. Beneath it, a smaller line. Royal family sends word of recognition. I put the toast down. Vivian was watching me, not smiling, waiting. 6 weeks ago, the device had said error, and Cyrus had said get out, and I had walked into the rain barefoot. 6 weeks ago, the name Adrian meant nothing. It was not spoken in any room that mattered. It was not printed. It was not recognized. It belonged to no family, no house, no lineage. It was a tool's designation, and when the tool broke, the designation was thrown out with it. This morning, the kingdom said my name at breakfast. I did not know what to do with that. I did not feel triumph. Triumph is what you feel when you defeat something. This was not a defeat. This was weight. The weight of being seen by people who had never once looked. The weight of a photograph that placed me beside Vivian and Laurel and Finn, as if I belonged there, as if I had always belonged there, as if belonging were not the most terrifying word in my vocabulary. The Drayton family was, by now, a sentence in the back pages of the same newspaper, 3 names in a court report. The kingdom had already moved on to the next headline, and the boy they had discarded was on the front page. I picked the toast back up. Vivian was still watching. "Congratulations," she said, quiet, steady, as if she had been waiting 6 weeks to say it. I ate the toast. It was the first piece I had ever finished without rushing, without counting the seconds, until someone told me the table was not mine. The toast was warm. The light was warm. The newspaper sat between us like a door that had opened and could not be closed again. I did not know how to hold the new shape of my life. I held it anyway. The mountain mansion smelled like cedar polish and expensive candles. First and second years packed the ballroom after dinner, and the vice principal had talked long enough that half the room was ready to collapse before the music even started. Vivian held out her hand. "Dance with me." I did not know the steps. She led anyway, one hand on my shoulder, guiding me through the turns until the rhythm stopped being foreign and became something I could follow. Laurel was next. She placed her hand in mine carefully, like she was afraid of leaving a mark. The dance was shorter, quieter. She thanked me with a nod and stepped away before I could say anything back. Across the floor, Hudson was telling anyone who would listen that he had danced with 5 partners already. Sienna stood near the wall with her arms folded, glaring at the room as if it had personally offended her. Then she crossed the floor, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me onto the tiles without a word. "You are going to dance with me," she said, "because every boy in this room is an idiot." Vivian watched from the edge, with an expression I chose not to interpret. The evening felt ordinary. It was not. Finn had followed a girl into the corridor. She smiled, walked him past the last sconce, and stepped aside. 3 black class students were waiting. The largest one took Finn's gold star medal from his collar before he could react and told him to bring me or it would get worse. Finn did not bring me. He stood there bleeding from the forehead and told them he would not sell out his friends to anyone. Aiden arrived from the balcony. He had been watching the room all night, the way he watched rooms now, reading exits and blind spots, the way other people read menus. He stepped into the corridor, returned Finn's medal, and deployed a light magic domain he called the 4 Pillars Array, 4 anchor points along the stone columns. The lead hunter walked into it and did not walk back out. Aiden returned to the ballroom with blood on his cuff and said nothing. Finn said nothing. Vivian leaned into my shoulder, and in the silence between songs, I told her quietly that this would not happen again. The metal hunters who called themselves Garyon had made their last free move. The return train was supposed to be uneventful. It was not. 3 Garyon ambush squads hit the train simultaneously. 1 for me, 1 for Hudson, 1 for Sienna. They had waited until travel, banking on us being tired and separated. My attacker was a dual wielder named Bado, who combined a greatsword with wind blades. He was fast, and his vacuum slash split into fragments that caught my shoulder before I could read the pattern. I froze the floor beneath him, raised a set of ice mirrors, and let the reflections do the rest. The mirrors carried the sleep hypnosis technique Alessa Reed had taught months ago. Bado swung at his own reflections until the effect stacked and he dropped. Down the corridor, Hudson solved his problem the Hudson way. His opponent hid behind a fire barrier, so Hudson raised an earth wall between them and punched through it. The shrapnel did the rest. Sienna trapped hers inside a shrinking ring of fire until there was nowhere left to dodge, then ended it with the flat of her blade. The 3 hunters were handed to the train guards. A witness who had watched my fight stayed behind. He introduced himself as Neos, a second year from the Hounds class, and said he had been forced into the role. He smiled when he said it. The smile sat wrong on his face, like something practiced in a mirror that did not reflect back correctly. He gave us a name, Silver, and an address, a casino called the Rose in the Eclair district. I thanked him. He smiled again, and the second smile was worse than the first. 3 nights later, we went in. Aiden, Hudson, Sienna, and me. I had not told Vivian. That was a decision I would pay for, and I knew it while I was making it. The Rose smelled like cheap tobacco and spilled liquor. The gambling floor was full of faces too young to be there, and the dealers' hands moved in patterns that had nothing to do with chance. Sienna lost at the slots and announced loudly that the machines were rigged, which was both true and unhelpful. Hudson won at poker until the dealer started cheating, and then he won the argument about the cheating instead. Aiden kept his mouth shut and mapped the room. I found the passage in the restroom, a mirror with a single dirty smudge that did not match the glass. It opened onto a corridor that smelled like something money could not clean. The back rooms held roughly 30 armed members. Aiden told me to go ahead. Sienna threw a fireball to carve the opening, and I went through. Silver was waiting in the last room. He fought with dual swords and wind magic, and he was better than his subordinates by a wide margin. His cross-pattern slash caught my ribs before I found the opening. But the back office was sealed, the air was still, and every condition the Kumai phenomenon required was present. I drew Frostflower, let the ice collide with his wind at the point where the density peaked, and the world went colorless for a single held breath. Silver did not get up after that. His records confirmed what the floor had suggested. Garyon had been laundering stolen metals through the casino and selling them to nobles. The knights arrived on call and took everything, including the young patrons who should never have been inside. I walked out knowing two things. The guild was finished and Vivian was going to be furious. On the rooftop across the alley, a figure watched the front door. Purple hair, a polite smile. Neos turned away and vanished before the street lamp could catch his shadow. Breakfast the next morning was silent in the way that silence is when someone has decided not to yell. Vivian poured tea. She did not look at me. She placed the cup exactly where I could reach it and then sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the window. I asked Aiden for advice at school. He called it a lover's quarrel in the flattest voice I had ever heard and told me to fix it fast. Vivian asked Laurel for advice. Laurel told her to go first. We met in the hallway that afternoon and said the same words at the same time. Both of us asked if the other wanted to go out the next day. The hallway was empty, which was merciful because neither of us could look at the other without something between a laugh and an apology trying to escape. We went to the village where we had cleared goblins before. 20 minutes of field work, nothing worth narrating. The meadow behind the village was the real destination. Vivian sat in the grass with her knees drawn up and her silver hair loose, and for a while, neither of us said anything. An old woman from a nearby farmhouse wandered out, saw us sitting together, smiled the kind of smile that has outlived 3 generations of arguments, and went back inside. I told her I was sorry, not the short version, the real one. I should have told her about the casino. I should have brought her. The protective reflex that made me leave her behind was older than our relationship, and it came from a place where being excluded was safer than being included. And I knew that place was wrong now, but knowing it and fixing it were 2 different things. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, without looking at me, that she would have rather been dropped from the team than kept out of the plan entirely. I am not asking you to stop protecting people. Her voice was steady. I am asking you to let me stand where you stand. I could not promise it would never happen again. She knew that. The honest answer was that the reflex was not gone, just seen, and that seeing it was the only progress I could offer today. She accepted it the way she accepted most things about me, which was completely and without conditions. We walked home. The meadow stayed behind us, and the argument stayed in it. A few days later, the monster biology field trip brought us into the Twilight Mountains. Professor Carla Atlee set the perimeter, explained the assignment, and told everyone to sketch 3 species and stay inside the barrier. Caleb Archer did not stay inside the barrier. He had been spiraling since I beat him months ago, and his grades had followed the spiral down. He led 2 followers past the tree line and through the detection ward, and the ward screamed before his voice did. 3 chimeras, rank A, lion heads, dragon bodies, snake tails. 1 was bad. 3 was an evacuation order. Professor Atlee reached Caleb first and pushed the lead chimera back with a wave technique. The other 2 circled wide. Vivian and I arrived at speed. Laurel and Finn pulled Caleb and his people out of the zone, while Vivian, the professor, and I each took one. Mine tried to burn through my ice binds by raising its own body temperature. I let it. When it committed to the heat, I switched to the mirror technique and put it to sleep before the spear finished the job. All 3 went down at the same time. Caleb was escorted back to the academy in restraints, which was generous. The professor looked at us with an expression that said she was proud and furious in equal measure, which was the correct response. The strange events had stacked up. Dance ambush, train ambush, casino, chimera. Finn suggested what the rest of us were thinking, that we needed a day where nothing tried to kill us. Garnet Street on a holiday afternoon. all 7 of us. Hudson found a game stall with a giant enchanted fly trap that grabbed prizes when you poked it with a needle. I poked it wrong and it bit the shopkeeper's head. Vivian called it a masterpiece. Hudson skipped the needle entirely and punched the plant, which was disqualified but loudly applauded. Aiden won a wind bracelet by calculating the exact stimulation angle because Aiden could not do anything without making it precise. In the weapon shop, Laurel held a red spellbook against her chest and asked if she should buy it, and when I said yes, her glasses fogged and she pretended it was the humidity. The clothing store became Sienna's territory. She had opinions about fabric weight, hem length, and the specific shade of caramel that suited Vivian's complexion, and she delivered them with the authority of a field commander issuing deployment orders. Laurel tried on a dress, stood in front of the mirror, and looked surprised by what she saw. Vivian whistled. I kept the image. We bought sweet drinks and fruit sandwiches and sat near a fountain. Finn produced a magical camera from somewhere and lined us up. 7 students, 1 fountain, 1 afternoon, where the worst thing that happened was a plant biting a shopkeeper. The photograph printed in soft color. I folded it and put it in my pocket. On the walk home, a figure passed us on the opposite sidewalk. Purple hair, white skin, eyes the wrong distance from the rest of his face. Neo smiled politely and kept walking. Finn waited until the figure was gone. Then he turned to me and his voice dropped below the conversation. I do not like the way his magic smells. It smells empty. Finn's wind perception had been our most reliable scanner since the dungeon. When Finn flinched, the correct response was to flinch with him. The Academy's days had stopped being only school days somewhere between the casino and the Chimera field. The photograph in my pocket was the only proof I had that I was allowed to keep wanting them. I kept it anyway. 2 weeks before the second midterm, I sat on the balcony with Vivian and said something I had never said to anyone. I'm going to take first place this time. She looked at me, and for a moment the expression on her face was not surprise. It was relief, as if she had been waiting for me to stop pretending 80 was the best I could do. Promise me. She held out her little finger. I hooked mine around it. The pinky swear lasted a full breath. Neither of us pulled away first, and I understood, on that balcony with the cicadas filling the silence, that the boy who scored 80 on purpose was a boy who was still obeying the Draytons, not their orders, their idea of what he was allowed to be. That boy was done. The midterm practical arrived on a cloudless afternoon. Hudson fought first, dismantling Max Ravens with a ground-shaking counter that sent the spear spinning into the dirt. The crowd roared. Hudson showed me his palms afterward, raw and torn from weeks of training I had not seen him do. Then my name was called, and Aiden dropped from the upper seats into the arena like he had been waiting all semester. Third time, he said. First one that counts. We drew at the same moment. His light barrier sealed us inside a dome of blazing gold, and the spectators lost sight of everything. Inside that dome, we fought honestly for the first time. Sword met sword. 3 ice spears canceled 3 light bullets in a burst of white mist. He swung his thunderblade, a lightning-wrapped arc that carved through my ice block and singed the air where my cheek had been. I let him swing it again. The second time, I caught the clash point where our magic collided and poured everything into the gap. Darkness. My technique, the one I had not shown anyone. Ice so dense it swallowed light itself. The dome shattered. Aiden hit the ground on his back, chest heaving, and the crowd saw the arena for the first time in minutes. The examiner called the match. I walked over and held out my hand. He took it. His grip was firm and honest. Thank you, Aiden. He almost smiled. Same to you. Outside the fence, a journalist had recorded the entire fight through a high-performance camera that could see through magic barriers. By morning, the Kingdom newspaper would have it on the front page. The front page changed everything. Noble factions protested. The corridor filled with stares. Osvaldo, who had been waiting for a pretext since the day I arrived, arranged his final move, a formal duel with Caleb Archer in the courtyard, witnessed by half the school. The rules were simple, weapons only, no magic except reinforcement. Osvaldo handed Caleb a new blade. He handed me a rusted sword with chips along the edge. Caleb swung with the confidence of someone who had been promised a fixed outcome. I stepped inside the arc. pivoted on my back foot, and kicked his wrist with a spinning heel strike I had borrowed from Hudson's wrestling style. The blade left his fingers and rang off the cobblestones. Silence. The kick was not a weapon. It was not magic. It was perfectly legal under the duel rules, and every witness knew it. Osvaldo's face went the color of a bruise. He opened his mouth, found nothing that would save him, and walked away. His career as an examiner ended on that gravel, and he did not even have the dignity of a dramatic exit. Walking back through the corridor, I passed an alcove near the stairwell and caught the shape of two figures. One was Max Ravens, leaning against the wall with a crumpled newspaper in his fist. The other was a purple-haired senior whose back was to me. I heard only the tail end of a sentence, delivered in a voice that was too polite for the words it carried. Max's expression shifted from anger to something hungrier. I did not stop. I filed it and kept walking, but the senior's posture stayed in my memory, the way Finn's warning about empty magic had stayed after Garnet Street, and the unease sat at the base of my skull like a low hum that would not resolve. Summer break began, and we reported to the Night Order headquarters. Alessa Reed had recommended all four of us for a field rotation, and I had convinced Laurel to sign the form by telling her, honestly, that I needed her there. She had looked at me with an expression I could not read and said yes. Our captain was waiting in the training yard. Brad was tall, disheveled, smelled faintly of alcohol, and wore his coat like it had been slept in. He ordered a spar before introductions were finished. Vivian opened with a waterspout. Brad copied it, word for word, and the two jets canceled in midair. Laurel cast a dark cloud. Brad copied that too. Finn sent a windblade. Brad matched it. I fired 3 ice lances. He melted one with fire, a 5th attribute none of us had expected. He stopped the spar, handed us mission scrolls, and walked away, humming. Vivian looked at me. He is either brilliant or insane. Both, I said, and I was not wrong. Our first real mission took us to a village near a mountain lake. A biologist had reported sightings of a creature called a Cleone, and we were sent to investigate. The village materialized through fog like something that did not want to be found. Nobody would speak to us. The inn was silent. Vivian noticed that the village had no church, which was the first thing that felt genuinely wrong. Armed villagers surrounded us after nightfall. We escaped through a wall Vivian punched open with water magic, regrouped in the forest, and followed the trail to the lakeside. An altar waited by the water, stone pillars, a slab that opened like a mouth. The village chief and his leaders walked into the shallows, chanting. The Cleone rose from the lake, enormous and pale, floating above the surface with an alien grace that made me understand why they had called it an angel. An epidemic had ended the year it appeared. Coincidence became devotion. Devotion became sacrifice. The Cleone descended on the village leaders. They did not survive its embrace. We moved. Brad copied Vivian's water spell to pin the creature's reach. Laurel's dark magic disrupted its senses. Finn's wind held it in place. I froze the limbs that thrashed through the mist. Brad finished it with a single wind-wrapped sword stroke that split the thing in half, and the fog swallowed the sound. I froze the body for the kingdom to examine. On the ride home, I asked Brad why the villagers had worshipped it. He lit a cigarette that had no magic in it and said the epidemic ended by coincidence. The creature ate their leaders because that was what it did. The villagers were not evil. They were grateful for the wrong reason. I did not have a response to that. Some things do not have one. That evening at the Celsius Manor, we met Carla Atlee and her brother Lane, a knight captain. Vivian asked Lane directly whether Brad was trustworthy or just strange. Lane laughed. He looks like he slept in a ditch, but he is one of the strongest and most principled knights I have ever served beside. You will understand when it matters. Vivian did not look convinced. I filed the information next to everything else I had learned about a captain who could copy 5 kinds of magic and smoked a cigarette after killing a monster the size of a house. The next mission was a routine warehouse inspection at the old port ruins. The door was unlocked. Fresh footprints led into the dark. I went down to scout alone and fell through a trap floor into a sealed chamber. In the corner, hiding behind barrels, was a young man with blonde hair and deep blue eyes who introduced himself as Eli. He said he had been lured from a casino and was hiding from the thieves who had taken him. We found a map, fought our way past 10 guards, and reached the stairs where the guild leader Gemma was waiting behind a spinning water shield that swallowed every strike. Somewhere above us, Brad was doing something the team would argue about for the rest of the summer. He used a forbidden memory searching spell on a captured guard. The spell had a reputation for leaving the target's mind in pieces, and Brad used it the way a locksmith uses a pick, quick and precise and without apology. He learned what the rest of us did not yet know. The Death Eater's Wing Guild had kidnapped the kingdom's first prince, and he was somewhere in this compound. The mission jumped from D rank to S rank in a single breath. I froze the water shield from the inside. Gemma's expression shifted from confidence to something closer to fear, and in the gap, Vivian arrived from a side passage and knocked him out with a single measured strike. Eli straightened his coat, dropped the act, and smiled like a boy who had been waiting for the right moment to stop pretending. "My name is Edmund Orex," he said, first heir. I had been calling him Eli for an hour. I did not change my posture. The prince laughed, and the laugh was genuine, and I understood that the laugh was the entire reason he had not told me sooner. He wanted one conversation where someone treated him as a person, not a title. Under interrogation, Gemma named the organization behind the kidnap, a secret society whose members wore black coats embroidered with a stylized tree. The Death Eater's Wing had been their payment trail. The society had demanded tribute, and the guild had delivered a prince. Headmaster Sepharis, hearing the report at night headquarters, exchanged a long look with Captain Rain that said more than either of them spoke aloud. Brad walked out of the compound, lit another cigarette, and observed that the kingdom's underbelly had begun to point upward. Prince Edmund invited us to a private beach by way of apology. He insisted we call him Eli, then unveiled his personal swimsuit designs with the pride of a man who had spent his entire confined childhood designing them and never once shown them to a friend. The female designs were ambitious. Vivian appeared in a racing-cut suit that was mostly straps. Laurel emerged in something that involved a cow print pattern. Sienna walked out in a sling that left almost nothing to interpretation and immediately walked back in. They changed into normal swimwear within 5 minutes. Edmund did not understand why. Hudson won the swimming race. Edmund placed second. Finn lay on the sand grinning at the sky. The prince produced a watermelon with eyes and leaves that moved like teeth, a rare cultivar called suica that none of us could split until Hudson grabbed the vine and swung the whole thing overhead like a hammer. We sailed to a heart-shaped island called Musubi Island, following a legend about a pirate treasure that bound couples together. Finn tripped a boulder trap. Vivian diverted it with a water column. Aiden found a treasure chest containing a map that led to the center of the island. We descended into a cavern through an ice ladder I built, and at the bottom found an old chest sitting on a small underground beach. Edmund opened it with the ceremony of a coronation. Inside was a single parchment, a letter from Headmaster Sepharis, explaining that the real treasure was the friends who had helped us reach it. Edmund's shout echoed through the cavern for a long time. The rest of us laughed until our ribs hurt, and somewhere above the island, Sepharis was almost certainly sipping tea and enjoying the fact that this prank had worked on another generation. The sun went down over the water. Vivian and I sat at the edge of the surf, and she asked me, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual, how she had looked today. "Beautiful," I said. "It suited you." She smiled the way she smiled when she did not trust herself to speak, and for a moment the whole summer existed in the space between our shoulders. Then Laurel came to call us back. She was further down the beach, half turned away, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were red. Finn saw it too. Neither of us approached. Vivian asked me quietly if Laurel was all right. I said no, because she was not. Some quietness is grief. Some quietness is something I have not yet learned to read. And Laurel's quietness had, for some time now, been a category I did not have a name for. If I had walked over, if I had asked, maybe what came next would not have happened the way it did. But I did not walk over, and the sun went down, and the summer ended, and the answer waited in the dark where I had left it. The ride back from the beach was quieter than it should have been. Vi sat beside me on the front bench of the carriage, her braid drying stiff from the salt water. Finn dozed against the siding with his hat tilted over his eyes. Behind us, the road unwound through oak and cedar in the last of the afternoon light, and the air smelled like warm bark. Laurel was in the rear seat. She had not spoken since the beach. I could see her in the side mirror, her glasses balanced on her knees, her eyes pointed at nothing. I had watched her cry on that rock at sunset, and I had not gone to her. I did not know what I would have said. Finn stirred. "Think Edmund made it back already? His escort left before us," Vi said. She glanced at me, then at the mirror. She had seen the same thing I had. Neither of us said it out loud. We just let the carriage roll on, and the golden road stretched, and the question of what had broken inside Laurel sat in the empty air between us, like something we were not yet allowed to touch. Finn sat up first. His eyes went wide, and his hand found the carriage rail. "Something is wrong." I felt it a second later, a pressure in the air, deep and cold, like a door opening into a room that had been locked for centuries. It rolled through the canopy in a wave that shook the leaves off the lower branches. "That direction," Finn said. His voice had gone thin. "Massive presence. I have never felt anything like it." Vi was already standing. "That is Edmund's route." I pulled Frostflower from the bench sheath and dropped off the carriage before it stopped. Vi landed beside me. Laurel, silent, followed. Her glasses were back on, her face set to something I could not read. We ran. The convoy was already finished by the time we reached the ridge. Below us, a crimson barrier shimmered around a carriage with its wheels blown off. Prince Edmund was inside, pounding on the walls of light with both fists. Around the barrier, the bodies of his guards lay scattered in the grass. None of them moved. The demon had overwhelmed them one after another, and none had survived the first minutes. The demon itself stood in the center of the road, one eye, a suit, a cane. It turned its head toward the ridgeline and smiled, and I understood in that single look what kind of thing we were dealing with. A figure dropped onto the path in front of me before I could descend. Black coat, red bandana, a spear he should not have been able to lift. Max Ravens. His eyes were dilated and his grin was too wide, and his mana signature was laced with something dark and foreign. He told me, through that manic grin, that I was not getting past him. 3 exchanges. He swung the spear with strength that did not belong to his frame. I froze the ground under his footing on the second pass and drove my elbow into his jaw on the third. He folded. The dark magic enhancement bled out of him like smoke from a candle, and by the time he hit the dirt, he was just a boy who had been promised something he should never have taken. I stepped over him and looked down the slope. A slow clap came from behind the tree line. He stepped out the way he always did, calm, hands in his pockets, that smile that never reached his eyes. Neos, the academy student who smelled like nothing, whose mana Finn could never quite pin. He told me, in that polished voice of his, that Max had served his purpose. He called him a dog. He said the prince was already finished. I closed the distance. Frostflower came out. The blade met something invisible and rang like it had struck iron. His hands moved and the air split. Phantom blades, 5 of them, extending from his fingertips like glass I could not see. I blocked 2. The third opened a line across my left forearm. He told me then, still smiling, that he was a demon born from the hearts of men, that his control over spirit was absolute, that no human had ever matched it. Below us, the one-eyed demon pressed Captain Rain into the dirt. Rain's fire technique had scored a hit, but the creature simply stood back up, unfazed. Reinforcements broke through the tree line. Headmaster Sepphoris descended from above, his staff blazing with 4 elements compressed into a single strike. The one-eyed demon called Grasha took the hit full in the chest and did not survive it. Alessa Reed and Brad arrived half a step behind, cutting through the road toward me. Neos saw them coming. He stepped backward into a fold of dark magic that opened like a wound in the air. "My true name," he said, as the fold swallowed him, "is Laraje. Remember it." The fold closed. The smoke cleared. The prince was free, and Captain Rain was alive, and Grasha was gone. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the demon who had been hiding inside a student's smile had a name now, Laraje. The lazy summer was over. 2 weeks passed. School resumed. The kingdom buried the prince's guards in a military ceremony I attended in the second row with Vi. Edmund stood in the first row and did not cry. but his hands shook the entire time. During those 2 weeks in a briefing room I was not supposed to know about, Headmaster Sepharis and Alessa Reed had a conversation that would reach me later, in pieces. Sepharis held up his right hand. The skin across the knuckles was blackened, cracked. The staff he had used to destroy Gracia had drawn more power than his body could channel. He was 78 years old, and his magic reservoir was shrinking. "I am not what I was," he said. Alessa healed the surface damage with first aid magic, but they both knew the problem was deeper than skin. They discussed the students who had been mentally influenced. Max Ravens, Silver, the same signature, the same handler. Larage had been inside the academy for months, recruiting from the margins, and they had not caught it. Sepharis told Alessa to investigate the rest of the student body quietly. He said he was not ready to involve Adrian and the others. Not yet. Not until he understood the full shape of the threat. He closed the briefing folder and looked at his blackened hand for a long time. The first day of the new term, Laurel walked through the academy gate, and I did not recognize her. Her hair was cut short and streaked with color. Her glasses were gone. Her clothes were brighter than anything I had ever seen her wear. She moved differently, smiled differently, spoke differently. She grabbed my arm in the courtyard and pulled me toward the main hall with a laugh I had never heard from her before. Vi went pale beside me. Finn, arriving from the dormitory path, stopped mid-step and stared. The girl who had been crying on a rock 3 weeks ago was now the brightest person in the courtyard, and something about the brightness made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. 3 days later, Laurel asked me to spend the afternoon in the capital with her. I said yes, because saying no would have been the first cruelty I had aimed at her in 3 years of friendship. She had been my quiet, steady, dependable friend since the first week. If she needed a day out, I owed her that. Vi did not say anything when we left. She did not have to. I could feel her watching from the dormitory window as we walked through the front gate. Laurel was bright. That was the problem. She was bright the way a lamp is bright when someone has turned the dial past the mark. She laughed too quickly. She leaned too close. She asked me to try a coat and then asked me if I liked the color of her eyes, in the same sentence, as if the two questions were the same kind of question. In the clothing store, I looked at a black ribbon hanging on a display hook and thought of Vi. Laurel came back from the fitting room. She stood in front of me and said my name, and as I looked up, something cold passed over my vision. A fuzz, a dimming, like the first seconds of a sleep spell before the body catches it. My fingers tingled. My thoughts slowed. It lasted less than a heartbeat. Then it was gone, and Laurel was smiling, and I told myself it was nothing. Behind me, somewhere in the shop, I did not hear Finn's warning. I did not see Vi push through the front door. I did not feel the second trace until it was already too late. Laurel said my name again, and the world went dark. I woke in a room I had never seen. High ceiling, gauze curtains, a window that looked out over the Eclair district, the capital's night quarter, where the lamp poles burned amber and the streets smelled like perfume and old money. My head felt like it had been packed with wet cotton. Laurel was sitting on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were darker than I remembered. Her smile was wider. The aura around her pulsed with something I recognized now, something I should have caught in the clothing store. Dark magic, low grade, threaded through her like ink through water. She spoke to me softly. She told me to relax. She said we could stay. I asked her why I could not remember the walk here. She did not answer. Laurel, I sat up. What happened to you? Her smile flickered. Then the dark aura thickened, and I felt it land on me like a hand pressing down on my chest. A pull, deep, warm, heavy. It wanted me to lie back. It wanted my eyes to close. It wanted consent I would not freely give. I bit my tongue. The pain was immediate and sharp, and it cut through the enchantment the way Alessa Reed had taught me to break sleep spells in 3rd month. Focus breaking, not elegant, just enough. The pull weakened. Laurel's face changed. Why? She whispered. The dark aura around her folded inward. Her hair darkened at the tips. Her irises went black. Wings of shadow unfurled from her shoulders, and her entire frame shifted into something threatening. Something not Laurel. Something ancient and furious, and deeply, deeply sad. She came at me with claws of dark essence. Frostflower was at my hip. One draw, and I could end the corruption in a single strike. I knew it. She knew it. The demon watching from the rooftop across the street knew it. I did not draw. I stepped inside her swing. I opened my arms. I held her. I should have noticed, I said. On the beach, on the rock. I saw you crying and I walked away. I am sorry I did not notice. She went rigid. The shadow wings trembled. Her claws stopped an inch from my back, and then they were not claws anymore. They were just hands, and the hands were shaking, and the dark aura cracked down the center like ice on a warming river. Laurel cried, not the quiet crying from the beach. This was the kind that comes from somewhere below the lungs, the kind that sounds like it has been locked in a room for months. She pressed her face into my shoulder, and I held her the way a brother holds a sister he has failed, and the corruption bled out of her like fever breaking. She whispered something I barely caught. She said she understood. She said she was sorry. She asked me to let her stay just a moment longer. Then she fell asleep, her breathing evening out against my shoulder, and the room was quiet, and the dark aura was gone. I laid her down. I pulled the blanket over her. I walked to the window. On the rooftop across the street, a figure sat with his legs dangling over the edge, watching me with a grin that belonged to no human face. Larage. I went to the door. Vivian and Finn found Laurel before I reached the stairs. I heard Vi's voice through the door as I passed it, low and steady, the way she spoke when she was trying very hard not to break something. Laurel was awake. She was crying again, but this time it sounded different. This time, there were people in the room. Laurel told Vi, in a single sentence, the thing she had been carrying since the beach. Vi said nothing for a long time. Then she said, I know. I kept walking. That conversation was theirs. It had always been theirs. The rooftop was flat and wide, and the night sky above it was clear enough to count the stars. Larage stood at the far edge. He was not wearing the academy face anymore. His skin was pale as paper, his eyes were blue fire, and his frame was taller than it had any right to be. 10 blades of invisible magic extended from his fingers like a crown of glass I could not see. He told me, through the narration, I will not give him the dignity of quoting, that Laurel's blood had always carried the dormant corruption, that he had merely woken it, that Max Ravens and Silver had been the same kind of experiment. He said he collected people the way a child collects insects, and that I was the only one whose wings had refused to come off. A dome of dark magic sealed the rooftop. The barrier was black and total. No one outside could sense what happened within it. I drew Frostflower. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds. His 5 blades met my single edge, and the air between us screamed. I froze the rooftop surface under his footing. He shifted, and 3 blades came from the left. 2 I blocked. The third caught my right shoulder, and the pain was a white line drawn from collarbone to spine. He doubled the blades. 10 now, 5 per hand. He told me no one had ever survived the full set. I believed him. I made the calculation in the space between 2 heartbeats. Frostflower had 1 technique left, the technique I had never used, the technique Frostflower had shown me in a dream during the dungeon phase, the one that emptied every reserve the sword held and discharged it in a single burst. Kaimetsu. The name meant total eclipse. The cost was everything the wielder had left. My shoulder was already open, and the mana was bleeding out with the cold. My blood felt half frozen, and my consciousness was a candle flame in a draft. Good. Kaimetsu worked best at end condition. I charged. Larage read it. 5 blades came from the right. I shifted my body, not far, just enough that the blades missed the center of my chest and went through the space beside my heart instead. The impact drove the air out of my lungs, and I felt something inside me go quiet, but I was still moving. Frostflower blazed white. Every reserve, every drop of mana the sword had stored across 8 phases of my life, compressed into the blade and then released. The world went monochrome. The first Kaimetsu tore Larage's left hand apart and shattered his invisible blades. He staggered. His eyes went wide for the first time since I had known him. I swung again. The second Kaimetsu, consecutive, impossible, burning through reserves I did not have, hit him full in the chest. The rooftop disappeared in white cold light. When the light faded, Larage was gone. Not retreated, not wounded, gone. The barrier shattered with him. The night sky opened above me, full of stars I was too tired to count. I fell. The rooftop tiles were cold under my back. My blood was freezing in the open air. My consciousness was a thread. Then, in the space between the broken barrier and the open sky, she appeared. A woman, pink hair that moved without wind, eyes turned inside out. The pupils where the whites should be. She floated above me like she had been waiting, and perhaps she had been waiting, and perhaps she had been waiting since before I was born. She knelt. She did not speak. She drove her dark essence into my chest, and a black mark seared across my skin like cold tattooing itself into the muscle beneath. Not a wound, not a blade, a seal, a stamp, something placed with purpose by a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. She stood. She vanished. Somewhere below, I heard Vivian's voice calling my name. I thought about the photograph in my pocket. I thought about the beach. I thought about the boy who had been thrown out of the Drayton house 6 months ago and had somehow ended up on a rooftop in the Eclair district with half-frozen blood and a mark on his chest that he did not understand. Vivian had picked me up. Laurel had needed me, and I had stayed. And tonight, on this rooftop, I had spent everything because the alternative was to walk away from the people who had not walked away from me. The Draytons had thrown me out because I was worthless. Tonight, I had bought myself back. Not because someone told me to, because I chose to. The stars went out. The cold came in. I let go. I woke up 2 days later. The ceiling was white and smelled like linen and healing salve. The Academy Medical Wing. Vi was asleep in the chair beside the bed. Same posture as the first night she found me. She had not left. Brad was at the window with an unlit cigarette between his fingers, looking out at the courtyard. He did not turn around when I moved, but he said, "Morning, kid." I sat up. The black mark on my chest ached. The photograph was still in my pocket, slightly bent from 2 days of lying on it. Vi woke when the bed creaked. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she leaned forward and kissed my forehead. Once, quick. The first time she had done that, she pulled back and her eyes were red, and she did not say anything about it, and neither did I. "Larage is dead," she said. "By your hand. Laurel is safe. She is in the next room." I nodded. That was enough. Brad asked me what had happened on the rooftop after the barrier sealed. I told him. I told him about Kaimetsu. I told him about the mark. I told him about the woman. I described her. Brad's pen stopped when I mentioned the eyes. Larage called her the Star Reader, I said. Brad wrote it down. He looked at his notebook for a while, then at the unlit cigarette, then out the window. "So she took what was left of him," he said. "Dead or alive?" I did not have an answer for that. Finn brought water. Hudson arrived in a panic and was immediately shushed by everyone in the room. Laurel was in the next bed over, awake, her glasses back on, her braids back in place. She looked like herself again. She looked at me and then at her hands and then at me again, and I could see the apology forming behind her eyes. "Later," I said. "We are fine." She nodded once and turned to the window. Sepphoris appeared in the doorway. He looked at me, looked at the mark on my chest, and said nothing for several seconds. Then he produced a small notebook from his coat, wrote a single line, and closed it. "Rest," he said. "We will talk before the festival." He left. Brad followed, pausing at the door to point the unlit cigarette at me like an accusation. "Stop almost dying," he said. Then he was gone. The room settled. Vi pulled the chair closer. Finn sat on the floor by the window. Hudson leaned against the far wall with his arms folded, trying to look casual and failing completely. Laurel turned from the window and closed her eyes. I held the photograph. The faces were all there, every one of them, from a day that felt like it belonged to a different century. The black mark on my chest pulsed once, faintly, like a second heartbeat I had not asked for. I did not know what it was. I did not know who the Star Reader was. I did not know what she had placed inside me or what it would cost. But I knew the people in this room. I knew the faces in the photograph. And tonight, I had spent everything I had by choice. And the people around me had carried me back. And I was, for the first time, quietly and without announcement, someone I was willing to keep alive. The morning light came through the tall windows and touched the edge of the photograph, and I held it and I rested, and the mark on my chest beat on. 2 weeks after the medical wing, I went back to school. The mark on my chest had not changed. Snowflake-shaped, dark as a burn, pressed flat against the skin below my collarbone. It did not hurt. It did not glow. It sat there the way a scar sits, quietly, without apology. I kept it under my uniform and did not mention it. Laurel was waiting at the front gate with her glasses back on and her braids retied. She looked at me, opened her mouth, closed it again, and then said, "Good morning," as if the last month had been ordinary. I said it back. That was all either of us needed. At assembly, Sepphoris stood behind the lectern and spoke one sentence that turned the room silent. The Holy Selection Contest, dormant for 60 years, was being revived by order of the king. 3 gold star medals required to qualify. 3 tests. One winner walks away as the kingdom's holy knight. Vivian qualified. So did Aiden, Hudson, and Sienna. So did I. Vi looked at me from across the row. Her chin tilted. That meant she had already decided. If you are going, I said, then I am going. She did not smile. She nodded once, the way a soldier confirms a heading. That was better than a smile. That afternoon, Sepphoris called us to his office. All 4 of us, me, Vi, Laurel, Finn. Vice Principal Harlan stood at the corner window with his hands behind his back. Sepphoris did not waste time. He told us about the secret society, the tree symbol motif, the connections between Gemma's guild, Gracia, and Larage. The society controlled dark guilds across the kingdom, smuggling, extortion, worse, and they had become more active. Sepphoris believed the contest was their most likely window. Every leader in one arena, every defense stretched thin by ceremony. He asked us to be his eyes during the tournament. Vi spoke before anyone else could. She said we would. Laurel nodded, quiet but certain. Finn straightened his shoulders. I looked at Sepphoris and told him we understood. In the corner, Harlan nodded. It looked like agreement. It looked like a vice principal standing behind his headmaster. The audience will reread that nod later. Contest morning. The arena was full. Vi and I entered the field together as the announcer called our names. Cheers rose for every contestant before us. When my name came, the sound changed. A section of the noble stands started booing. The old faction families, who had never forgiven a commoner for standing where their sons should have stood. I did not flinch. In the royal box, Prince Edmund stood. He asked the booing section a single question: whether they had also booed when the Drayton family was arrested for trafficking forbidden compounds. The arena went quiet. Edmund gave me a thumbs up from across the field and sat back down as if he had not just silenced 300 nobles with one sentence. The first test began immediately. 14 contestants were teleported into a forest thick with purple mist that dampened magic. The task was simple: retrieve a cockatrice egg without breaking it. Inside the mist, my ice magic barely responded. A shield I should have raised in half a breath came out as a lump of frost the size of my fist. The cockatrices were sluggish too. The mist hit everything equally, but they were still A-rank beasts with teeth longer than my forearm. I found a senior named Dean near a nest with 2 eggs. He pulled me out of a cockatrice charge, scolded me for recklessness, and proposed we work together. He dug a pitfall trap. I lured the beast in and froze one of its legs with the little ice I could manage. We grabbed both eggs and ran. Dean stayed behind to cover our exit when a stronger presence appeared in the mist. Falcon Dread, a second-year summoner whose contracted beasts moved without incantation. Dean did not make it out on his own feet. The second test scattered us through an underground labyrinth. Each egg held a key, gold or silver. You needed both colors to advance. I had gold. Falcon Dread found me in a corridor and demanded I hand it over. I told him no. He summoned a salamander and a Quetzalcoatl, fire and wind together. The corridor turned into a furnace. I survived by coating myself in Frostflower's ice and holding. Then, Vi appeared behind the flame wall. She had already found her matching key, but had sensed the dangerous magic and come running. Her water met his fire. Steam filled the corridor. In the confusion, I cast an ice mirror illusion that reflected Falcon's own face back at his summons. They hesitated. One punch was all it took. I picked up his silver key and told him the debt for Dean was settled. 8 contestants advanced, all 5 first years among them. The third test was a 1-on-1 bracket. My first match, Sienna Elmore. She came at me with fire from the first breath, explosion spells, sword strikes, a barrage designed to drain my mana faster than I could replenish it. She had studied me. She knew that every time I used Frostflower for a high-level counter, it cost me enormously. Her strategy was simple: force me to spend until I had nothing left. For several exchanges, it worked. My breathing shortened. My arms grew heavy. In the stands, Vi watched with a rare worried expression, but Sienna's plan assumed I would keep matching her escalation. I stopped. I paced myself. I let 2 of her fireballs hit my ice barriers and shatter them rather than overcharging the counter. The waste was less than the alternative. She saw the shift and threw everything she had, her strongest spell, a pillar of flame that filled half the arena. I did not meet it with an equal wall. I ran straight into it, concentrated every drop of mana into Frostflower's point, and pierced through. 1 ice spear, 1 binding. Chains of frost locked around her arms and torso, and she dropped to 1 knee. The match was called. I walked to her and held out my hand. She looked at it for 3 full seconds before she took it. "Next time," she said. "I will not lose." I know. Her grip tightened. She looked at me with those crimson eyes and said something I had not expected. 1 sentence. She told me that she saw herself in me, someone whose parents had measured their worth by what they could produce. Some viewers will read that line as the start of something. Others will read it as recognition between 2 people who had been weighed on the same scale. I did not know which one she meant. I do not think she did either. Second semifinal. Vivian against Gina Elwood. Gina moved like someone reading a script the rest of us had not seen. Vi's arrows passed through empty air. Her sword swings missed by the width of a hair. Every attack Vi threw, Gina had already left the space it would occupy. It was not speed. It was not reflex. Gina saw seconds into the future. Aiden leaned forward in the stands and said it plainly. She was not reading ahead. She already knew. Gina's earth magic gathered under Vi's feet. The press hit before Vi could shift her weight. Her arms gave way under the force. She cried out, but did not yield. She stood with both arms hanging wrong, summoned a fog across the arena with her last spell, and charged through the mist with her bow clenched in her teeth. She slipped on the water her own fog had left on the stone. When the medics reached her, she was on her back, staring at the sky. Gina stood above her, untouched, except for a single scratch on her cheek where Vi's final strike had landed. The first mark anyone had ever left on Gina Elwood in a tournament match. Vi turned her head toward me as they carried her out. Her voice was steady. "She told me to win." I nodded. That was a promise. Third semifinal, Aiden Highland against Hudson Leo. Before the match, Hudson had put his hand on my shoulder and told me to focus on my own fight. Aiden had nodded from across the waiting room and said nothing, which was his way of saying the same thing. In the arena, Hudson hit first. His earth-shatter punch cracked the stone floor in a line that ran 20 paces. Aiden dodged, light magic, thunder sword strikes, a 4th-rank barrage of prismatic spears. Aiden threw everything and Hudson took it, hardened his body with stone armor, and kept coming. Then, Hudson revealed a wind speed boost no one had seen before. He closed the gap so fast that Aiden staggered. Aiden touched the locket under his collar, the one with Amelia's picture. Then, he moved at light speed. The Kaiman technique, a discharge of mana into a gap in reality that produced a monochrome flash visible from the stands. 1 strike. Hudson went down. He stayed down for 3 seconds. Then he grinned, accepted Aiden's hand, and told him next time would be different. Between matches, Finn found me. His face was pale. He had sensed 2 presences at the back of the arena, enormous mana, concealed under illusion magic, sitting at opposite corners like sentries. 2 figures in black coats with a tree symbol on the collar. They had walked past the guards without a challenge. Finn went straight to Sepphoris. I watched from the stands as Finn spoke, and Sepphoris' hand tightened on the arm of his chair. Harlan, beside the headmaster, asked Finn for details. Finn answered honestly. The audience below us cheered for the upcoming semifinal. They did not know what was sitting among them. 2 members of the secret society, Astaroth and Dantalion, had taken their positions. Their operation was hours from starting. I turned back to the arena floor. The announcer called my name. I walked onto the field to face Gina Elwood. She asked if I was fighting for revenge. I told her this was a serious match, and it would be disrespectful to Vi to fight with anything less. I attacked with everything I knew. Enhanced speed, Frostflower's ice wave, fog from above, spikes from below, mirror traps on every surface. She read each one. Her precognition showed her where I would be before I arrived there. She did not dodge my attacks. She was never in the place I aimed for. Her earth magic hit back. A wall of rubble I could not block in time. A hand strike to the side of my head that sent the arena spinning. I went to 1 knee, then both. The count began. From somewhere above me, I heard the crowd cheering. They were happy. The commoner was losing. In the infirmary, Vi sat up. Her arms ached and she could not lift them. but she watched through the broadcast crystal and she did not look away. From the stands, Finn's eyes dropped to my chest. The mark. I felt it before I understood it. A cold that did not come from Frostflower. Deeper, older, spreading from my sternum outward like a second heartbeat finding its rhythm. The snowflake pattern on my skin pulsed once and then held steady, glowing blue-white under the fabric of my uniform. I stood. I did not understand what was happening. The cold had always been mine, but this was not just mine anymore. Whatever the star reader had driven into my chest was answering now. A reservoir I had not known I carried. I did not know what it would cost. I knew that Vivian had told me to win, and the count was at 8, and I was not done. I chose to use it. Frostflower in my right hand, palm open in my left. The cold poured out of me in a wave that crossed the arena floor and kept going. The temperature dropped past freezing. The air itself turned visible, moisture crystallizing into a white haze that covered the field. The crowd gasped. The announcer sneezed. Sienna lit a flame in her palm just to stay warm. Gina saw it coming. Her precognition gave her 4 seconds of warning. 4 seconds to watch a wall of absolute cold arrive from every direction at once. She tried to run. The ground she ran on was no longer warm enough to run on. 3 ice spears. One grazed her side, the first blood anyone had drawn on her all day. She raised her rock armor, and I hit it with Frostflower's edge. The stone began to freeze. She activated her final technique, the Rock Demon, a golem of earth magic that rebuilt itself from fragments. The construct surrounded her, enormous and self-repairing, and swung at me with fists the size of my torso. I let it hit. I shattered against the golem's surface and mixed ice into every fragment the impact broke loose. When the golem regenerated, my ice came with it. The reconstructed armor locked in place. The joints froze. The rock demon stood perfectly still, a statue of its own design, with Gina trapped inside. She admitted defeat. Then she fainted. I stood in an arena turned blue-white, Mark glowing red-hot under my shirt, Frostflower steaming in my hand. The announcer declared the winner. The crowd, the same crowd that had booed me that morning, was silent. In the royal box, Sephiroth stood. At the back of the stands, 2 figures in black coats stood. In the infirmary, Vivian watched the crystal and did not blink. The contest was not over. The finals were still ahead, but whatever was coming next had nothing to do with the tournament. The arena was still frozen from my fight with Gina when the first explosion hit. Not fire, not magic I recognized. Stone fragments launched from the top of the stands, enveloped in a spinning funnel of wind that scattered them across the crowd like shrapnel. The audience went from silence to screaming in the space between one breath and the next. Seats cracked. Dust rolled across the field. Someone in the noble section was shouting for guards while children were being pulled toward the exits. I was on my feet before I understood why. The mark on my chest had gone dormant after the Gina fight, and every muscle in my body remembered what winning that match had cost me. But the sound of those explosions overrode everything else. I looked up. Above the royal box, on the rooftop of the Academy's eastern tower, a dark barrier had formed, a wall of black energy sealing the entire top floor from the outside world. Through the shimmer, I could make out 2 figures. One of them was Sephiroth, the other was Harlan. Except Harlan was smiling, and the smile was wrong. I watched the vice principal drop his human disguise the way someone sheds a coat they never liked wearing. Wings unfolded from his back, dark, membranous, too large for the body they came from. His eyes went red. Fangs caught the last of the daylight. He was not Harlan anymore. He was what he had always been. The audience in the stands screamed again, but this time the sound was different. This was not confusion. This was recognition. They knew what a vampire looked like, even if they had never seen one alive. Halpha struck first. A bolt of dark magic hit the space where Sephiroth had been standing. The headmaster vanished and reappeared 3 steps left, staff raised, already casting. The barrier sealed them in. Nobody outside could reach them. On the arena floor, 2 figures in black coats dropped their illusion and landed at the center of the field. Astaroth, Dantalion. I had seen them as mana presences in the stands during the semifinals. Now they stood in the open, and the operation Sephiroth had warned us about had begun. I ran. Hudson got there first. He charged Dantalion with that straightforward confidence he had never learned to second guess. 1 step, 2. A full-body earth slam aimed at Dantalion's center mass. Dantalion raised his right arm. A pulse of concussive force detonated on contact, and Hudson left the ground. He hit the arena wall and did not get back up. His eyes were closed. He was breathing. That was all I could confirm before Aiden moved. Aiden's light spear came down like a column of white fire, fast, precise. The kind of magic he had spent a semester sharpening into something lethal. Astaroth sidestepped it without looking. A gust of wind so compressed it whistled, and Aiden was folding backward into the rubble. Sienna was already casting. Her fireball crossed the gap in under a second. Astaroth's palm met it, redirected the heat into the dirt, and struck her once. She dropped. 3 of my friends unconscious in under 2 minutes. The gap between first-year students and secret society executives was not a gap. It was a canyon. I was alone with both of them. Then, Alessa Reed came through the shattered lobby entrance at a dead sprint, her teacher's robe torn at the shoulder, water magic already condensing around her hands. She threw herself at Astaroth without slowing down. I took Dantalion. His gravity pulse hit me mid-stride. Every limb I lifted felt like it weighed 3 times what it should. My arms dragged. My knees buckled. I pulled a sliver of the Mark's reservoir, just enough to lighten the pressure, and pushed him back 2 steps with an ice lance that cracked the stone under his feet. From the western corridor, Brad appeared. Behind him, a line of knights in formation, the reinforcements Sepphoris had arranged. Brad did not speak. He pointed his sword at the nearest cluster of white monsters flooding through the arena gates, and his knights moved like a current. The lower arena stabilized. For the first time since the explosions, I had a clear path to the rooftop. I ran for it. Finn came from the stands. He had been with Laurel near the teacher section when the explosions hit. Now, he was sprinting across the field toward the 2 figures in black coats, and I knew from the way he moved, not with fear, not with strategy, but with recognition, that something was wrong. He stopped 15 paces from Astaroth, his mouth opened. The name that came out was not the name the secret society used. He called him by his childhood name, the name of a brother who had disappeared years ago and never come home. Astaroth turned. He looked at Finn the way you look at a photograph you threw away. Then he raised his hand and cast a tornado spell directly at the boy who had just called him family. I was at the arena edge. I had the stairwell 3 steps behind me. Every second I stayed on this field was a second Sepphoris fought alone on that rooftop. But Finn was standing in the path of a spell that would have scattered him across the arena like leaves. I lunged back. Frostflower came up. The ice wall I raised between the tornado and Finn held for exactly long enough. The wind shattered the wall, and the cold bit into my right side hard enough to buckle my stance. I stayed standing. Finn stared at me. His face was wet. I could not tell if it was rain or something else. "You do not have to choose a family by blood," I said. 1 sentence. That was all either of us had time for. He closed his mouth. He straightened. He stood beside me, and from that point forward, he did not look at Astaroth as a brother again. He looked at him the way you look at the thing standing between you and the people you chose. Meanwhile, above us, the rooftop fight had changed. Through the fracturing barrier, I could see Sepphoris wielding something I had never seen him carry before, a massive golden blade that cut the dark mist around Halphus like it was tissue. Kongu, the holy sword. Its glow was visible even through the barrier, and the knights watching from below went silent. They knew what it meant when a man that old drew a weapon that legendary. It meant he was done holding back. Alessa engaged Astaroth behind us. The arena settled into parallel wars, the rooftop and the field, holy light and dark flame, teacher and operative. The sky tore open, not a metaphor, not a shimmer or a trick of light. A vertical crack split the air above the arena, black at the edges and burning at the center, and through it dropped a figure carrying a sword that was on fire. Not fire, something darker. Black flame that ate the light around it and gave nothing back. Valifor landed in the center of the field. He was taller than Astaroth, wearing a coat with wing designs stitched into the back, black hair, red eyes. Not bright red, not the red of anger, lifeless red. The red of something that had stopped pretending to care. Alessa moved first. Her water barrier rose between Valifor and the rest of us. He walked through it. The water did not extinguish the flame. The flame consumed the water. He kicked Alessa aside without breaking stride. He stopped 3 steps from me, and he said one word. "Brother." The mark on my chest erupted. Not pain. Worse, a pulling. A dark pattern spread from the mark across my chest. up my neck, into the left side of my face. I felt it behind my left eye. The iris shifted, red. Half my vision changed. The arena looked different through the red eye, sharper, colder. The mana signatures of everyone on the field were visible. Finn's wind, Alessa's water, Astaroth and Dantalion pulling back, the knights at the perimeter. Everything mapped out like a battlefield viewed from above. And somewhere underneath that clarity, a voice that was not a voice was telling me to take the hand being offered. That whatever family the demons had was better than the family that had thrown me into the rain. My hand found the photograph in my pocket. My other hand found Frostflower. Then I saw her, Vivian, standing in the doorway of the arena's east entrance, both arms in splints, silver hair catching what little light the torn sky allowed. She had walked from the infirmary on arms that should not have been bearing weight to reach me. I turned toward her, not toward Valifor. The pattern stopped spreading. The red eye held, but did not go further. Valifor wanted a brother who arrived through a crack in the sky. I had something better. The words I said to him did not matter enough to quote. What mattered was the meaning, that I did not need whatever he was offering, that the family I had chosen was standing behind me, that whoever he thought I was, he was not the one who got to decide. His black flame brightened. The fight began. Black flame against ice. Every exchange cracked the arena floor deeper. Valifor's sword, the demon blade, threw arcs of fire that burned holes in the stone where I had been standing a half second before. My ice met his flame and turned to steam. The steam turned to frost. The frost shattered under the next swing. I pushed him back 5 steps with a rising slash that used everything I had left in the reservoir, and he barely shifted his weight. Then my knee hit the ground. Not a choice. My body simply stopped cooperating. The Mark's reservoir was empty. Every ounce of mana I had borrowed was spent. I knelt on the cracked arena stone with Frostflower in my right hand, and nothing left in the tank. Valifor raised his sword. Black flame gathered at the tip, a single strike wide enough to swallow the space I was kneeling in. The air turned hot. The stone beneath my knees began to glow. From behind me, I heard footsteps, not running, walking. The slow, deliberate walk of someone whose body was fighting her with every step. Vivian knelt beside me. She did not speak. She put her hand over mine on the hilt of Frostflower. Her fingers were cold from the splints and warm underneath. They fit against mine the way a key fits a lock it was cut for. I had held this sword alone since that first night. It had never reacted like this. Water from Vivian's mana entered the blade. Ice from my mutation met it. The two cycled through each other in a rotating helix that ran from the hilt to the tip and back again, faster and faster, until the glow was not blue and not white, but something between, the color of a winter sky just before the first star appears. I understood in that moment what the sword had been trying to tell me. Frostflower had not chosen me. Frostflower had chosen us. It had been waiting, patient and cold and certain, for the night when 2 hands held the hilt instead of one. Her water met my cold. The sword had known before either of us did. Valifor's strike came. We parried it together, one motion, her hand guiding mine, my ice channeling her water, the blade singing a note so high and so pure that the arena went silent around it. The counter was a single stroke. The cold that left the blade was total, not a blast, not a wave, but a presence. The air around the arena froze. Valifor's black flame cut out like a candle meeting a blizzard. His legs locked. The ice climbed his body from the ground up, and he looked at me through it with those lifeless red eyes. And for the first time since he had descended through that crack, he said nothing at all. The dimensional rift above the arena tore wider. The freeze pushed him backward through it. 1 step, 2, 3, until he was gone, and the crack sealed behind him like a wound closing. The dark pattern on my chest receded. The red iris faded. My left eye returned. I knelt on the frozen arena floor with Vivian beside me and Frostflower still in our joined hands. No longer glowing, no longer humming, just a sword. The most important sword in the world, held by 2 people who had finally figured out what it was for. I looked up at the rooftop. The barrier was fracturing. Through the cracks, I could see the fight inside. Sephirus had driven Halphus to one side of the roof with Kongu's holy light, but the headmaster was on his knees. His right hand was dark from the magic he had been pouring through it for the past half hour. His breathing was visible in the cold air. He had been holding his body together for longer than anyone knew. Halphus gathered his remaining darkness for a final strike. The kind of strike that ends things. Sepphoris dropped Kongu. The golden blade rang against the stone and went still. He raised both hands. A pattern of light appeared beneath him, old, geometric, a design I had seen in exactly one forbidden magic textbook and hoped never to see performed. The sealing spell, the kind that traps a being in a dimensional pocket at the cost of the caster's life. Halphus recognized it. For the first time, the vampire stopped moving. Sepphoris spoke. The narration heard him clearly across the distance. He said he had been holding the body together for 2 years already. He said the seal was not a sacrifice. It was a schedule. The light consumed them both. Halphus screamed. The narration paraphrased it as a sound I would not forget. The kind of fury that comes from realizing you have been trapped by a man you thought was already beaten. The seal folded him into a closed pocket. The barrier collapsed. The rooftop went dark. I reached Sepphoris seconds later. Vivian was behind me. He was on his knees on the cracked stone, and the golden glow of Kongu's residual light was the only thing illuminating his face. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He looked finished. He looked at me. The sharp gray eyes were the same eyes that had watched me from behind spectacles in the headmaster's office. The same eyes that had stood in the royal box when the arena froze. The same eyes that had read Harlan's nod in the briefing and suspected nothing because there was nothing to suspect from a man who had spent a decade earning trust. He said, and I caught every word because I knew these were the last ones, that the academy keeps a surname in reserve for students who earn one. He said I should tell the next first year who arrives with no name that the name will be waiting. He said it the way he said everything, measured, dry, with the kind of authority that does not need volume. He had been waiting to give me permission to take a name. That was what the last 2 years of holding his body together had bought him. Not time to fight, time to see whether the students he had trusted would be worth trusting. And he had decided they were, and he was telling me now, on his knees on a rooftop, with the last of his light fading out. A nod was all I could give him. It was enough. It had to be. His breathing slowed. His eyes held mine. Then they did not. Behind me, on the arena floor, Astaroth and Dantalion watched. Astaroth said something to Dantalion. They turned and walked into the dimensional crack Valifor had left open. The crack closed behind them. The white monsters that had been flooding the academy grounds stopped moving, then dissolved. The operation was over. The academy was alive. Sepphoris was not. 3 days later, the rain started at dawn and did not stop. By the time the cathedral doors opened, the stone steps were dark with it, and the kingdom's flags hung heavy on their poles. The cathedral was the largest in the kingdom, and it was full. Knights stood along the walls in dress uniforms they had not worn since the coronation. Teachers filled the first 3 rows. The Requiem hymn echoed off the vaulted ceiling and through the colored glass, and the sound was the kind that sits in your chest whether you want it to or not. Prince Edmund spoke from the lectern, a short address about duty, about the kind of strength that protects rather than conquers. He did not read from a paper. He looked younger behind that lectern than he had in the royal box. He looked like he meant every word because he did not have enough years to have learned how to fake them yet. When he finished, he stepped down and walked past the grave marker without looking at it, because looking at it would have broken the composure he had just spent 3 minutes holding together. Alessa spoke after him. She talked about Sepphoris as a teacher, the way he could read a student's fear from across a classroom, the way he never raised his voice because he never needed to. She said he had hired her when no other school would take a mage without noble backing. She said she had spent 5 years trying to repay that, and now she would spend the rest of her life finishing the job. Her voice cracked once. She did not stop. Brad was not in the cathedral. He had said his piece the night before. They called my name last. The cathedral went quiet. Even the rain on the windows seemed to soften. Standing at the front, Vivian was beside me, Laurel behind her supporting Vi's still splinted arms. Finn stood closest to the grave marker, a simple stone, white, no title, just the name. He had not moved from that spot since the service began. Hudson and Aiden and Sienna stood at the periphery. Hudson let out one short laugh that caught in his throat and became something else. No one looked at him. everyone understood. My eyes found the stone less than a year. That was how long I had known Joseph Sepphoris. He had given me more in those months than the Draytons had given me in 6 years. He had looked at a boy with no surname and no sponsor and no reason to trust another authority figure, and he had given that boy a place to stand, people to stand beside, a copper star medal for surviving his first week, a seat at the briefing table when the secret society closed in, and on the rooftop, in his last breath, a name to earn. The thing about grief I was learning was that it did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. The empty chair in the headmaster's office that no one would fill this semester. The way the knights at the door kept glancing at the lectern as if expecting him to walk up and tell them all to sit down. The gold-framed spectacles someone had placed on the altar beside the grave marker, polished clean. Each detail was a small, separate weight, and together they were heavier than anything Valifor had thrown at me. My hand went to Frostflower, not to draw it, just to hold the hilt. Then I knelt and placed a single ice flower on the grave, handmade. The petals were thin and precise, and they would not melt because the cold that made them was the same cold that had saved every person standing in this room. The flower sat on the white stone and caught the gray light and held it. Vivian took my hand as we walked away from the grave together. Laurel steadied Vi's arms. Finn was the last to leave the stone. Aiden placed his hand on my shoulder as I passed him, and his grip was harder than it needed to be. The grip of someone who did not trust himself to say anything. Sienna stood behind me with her posture softened for the first time I could remember. She did not speak either. She did not need to. The night before the funeral, Brad went to the beach alone. Not the Academy beach, the one near Musubi Island, where Sepphoris had once hidden a treasure map letter as a graduation gift for the night cadets who could find it. Brad had been one of those cadets years ago. He had found the letter. He had kept it. He stood at the water's edge with his boots in the wet sand and the tide pulling at his ankles. He held an unlit cigarette between his fingers for a long time. Then he lit it, set it on the sand, and let the smoke curl upward into the evening air. He did not speak. He did not need to. The cigarette on the sand was the offering. The silence was the eulogy. Brad had always been the kind of man who mourned in private and showed up in public as though nothing had happened. The tide came in and took the cigarette. The boy who had been thrown into the rain on the worst morning of his life stood at the end, in rain that fell on a grave he had fought to make sure no one else would fill. He had not flinched then. He did not flinch now. I stood in it.